Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. On the evening of February 6, 2015, the silence of a cozy home in Goshen was shattered by a chilling discovery. Daniel Green, a respected law enforcement officer, was found lifeless in his own bathroom. 4 shots, 1 bullet to the forehead. No one heard the shots, no one saw anything suspicious, and there were no clues that could lead to the criminal. This was no accident. Everything looked as though someone acted with cold, calculated precision. Who could have taken the life of an officer who had dedicated his entire career to serving the community? The answers turned out to be far more complex and dark than anyone close to him could have imagined. The quiet of the empty house in Goshen, a small town surrounded by orchards, was abruptly interrupted. Lying on the bathroom floor, flat on his back, was a lifeless man. Daniel Green, a respected police officer. On February 6, 2015, right at noon, his colleagues, concerned that Daniel hadn't shown up for his shift, went to his home. What they found there shook them to their core. 4 bullets, one of which struck his forehead, ended the life of the 31-year-old officer. None of the neighbors had heard anything, no one had called emergency services, and not a single detail pointed to the identity of the perpetrator. There was no weapon, no trace of DNA. It all appeared as if the criminal knew exactly what they were doing, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. Daniel Green had lived in Goshen his entire life. He served in the California Police Department for 11 years and was well respected by the town's residents. He loved his job and always aimed to contribute to the community. His home was like a fortress in this quiet corner, where people knew and trusted one another. And yet, it was here that his life ended so abruptly and cruelly. The police began their investigation, which immediately focused on Daniel's personal life. He had been living alone since his divorce from 27-year-old Erica Sandoval. The relationship with her was far from simple, even after the separation. Daniel's colleagues and friends knew that Erica hadn't let him go, continuing to interfere in his life. She often tried to control him despite their official split. On February 6, 2015, Erica appeared at the scene almost immediately after she received a message from a friend. She entered the house, sobbing uncontrollably in front of the officers, insisting that she hadn't seen Daniel that day and had nothing to do with what had happened. However, her behavior raised suspicions among the investigators. She arrived at the scene too quickly, reacted too emotionally, and there were too many unanswered questions. The death of Officer Green shook the wonder. Was his tragic end related to the work he did, or was there something personal involved? The questions kept piling up, but one thing was clear. All these mysteries had to be solved as soon as possible. Motives, connections, personal conflicts. Investigators worked tirelessly, step by step, to uncover the truth, leaving no stone unturned. Matthew and Misty, Daniel's twin brother and sister, were deeply affected by his loss. They had grown up together in Porterville, a small town in California, where from a young age the twin brothers knew they wanted to be in law enforcement. Matthew began his career in the police force, but later decided to move into law. Daniel, on the other hand, stayed in the force, rising to the rank of officer and taking pride in his chosen path. Their sister always supported them and was proud of her brothers. Daniel Green was known not only for his police service, but also for his passion for motorcycles. He was a member of a motorcycle club, where he spent a lot of time enjoying the sense of freedom and speed. One of his close friends, James Bonds Downey, was particularly close with Daniel. Both loved taking rides through the countryside, enjoying the road and the sense of freedom their bikes gave them. Daniel's personal life was eventful. He enjoyed going on dates and was rarely alone. There was a period when he would show up to family gatherings each month with a new girlfriend. This continued until late 2009 when he met Erica Sandoval, a 22-year-old nurse. Meeting Erica changed everything for him. He fell head over heels in love and decided to settle down. By that time, his brother and sister were already married while he was still a bachelor. But with Erica, everything was different. Daniel was infatuated with her. Angelica Ramirez, a close friend of Erica, shared that at the beginning of their relationship, Erica was deeply in love with Daniel. Their passion was intense, and at first glance, they seemed like the perfect couple. However, as Daniel's sister recalled, Erica, despite her friendliness, could snap in an instant if something didn't go her way. Over time, tension built in their relationship, escalating into frequent conflicts and arguments. Erica Sandoval was born and raised in Southern California in a middle-class family. She had a brother, David Sandoval, who remembered that Erica, being the only daughter, always felt special. Her parents spoiled her and tried to give her the best of everything. She never experienced hardship or mistreatment and grew up expecting her wishes to be fulfilled without question. Erica always received support and attention from her parents and brother, which instilled in her a sense of entitlement and the belief that she deserved special treatment. The unexpected news of Daniel Green and Erica Sandoval's secret wedding in Las Vegas took everyone close to them by surprise. Daniel was 26 and Erica was 23 when they decided to tie the knot without telling anyone in advance. Daniel's brother and sister couldn't believe their eyes when they received a late-night message with a photo of the marriage certificate. A few weeks later, the newlyweds organized a small wedding celebration for their close ones, where Erica wore a white dress and Daniel wore a black suit. However, despite their apparent happiness, Daniel and Erica's relationship was far from perfect. Herb Adams, Daniel's friend and fellow motorcyclist, recalled how Daniel once shared that, even before their marriage, they had a fight and Erica took a razor and slashed the furniture in his home. It was a troubling sign that, in Herb's opinion, should not have been ignored. Matthew, Daniel's brother, personally saw the damage and was concerned, but Daniel insisted it was just an emotional outburst. The conflicts within the family continued. Matthew and Daniels witnessed one of these incidents. During an argument, Erica grabbed Daniel, shouting at him. In the next room, his brother and sister heard Daniel break down in tears. Matthew remembered that it was one of the most painful moments of his life. He felt devastated hearing his brother cry. Nevertheless, intervening in Daniel and Erica's relationship was difficult. The Green family grew up in challenging circumstances. Daniel's brother and sister remembered how they, along with their mother, endured harsh treatment from their stepfather. He had a criminal past, often drank heavily, and used banned substances. Matthew and Daniel, being older than their sister, often took the brunt of it to protect her. Eventually, their mother managed to get a restraining order, and soon after, their stepfather passed away. These events left a mark on each of them. Daniel's relationship with Erica had alarming parallels to his childhood. Family members noticed that Erica controlled her husband, isolated him from friends and family, and verbally demeaned him. Despite Daniel being a police officer, frequently encountering victims of domestic aggression, he couldn't admit that he was in a similar situation himself. He knew he was becoming a victim, but couldn't do anything about it. Fear, shame, and the reluctance to acknowledge vulnerability held him back. Men, just like women, often do not report domestic aggression for the very same reasons. The issues in Daniel and Erica's marriage reached a peak in February 2011. A neighbor of Daniel's witnessed a loud confrontation between the couple. Erica was yelling and provoking her husband, trying to push him over the edge. Daniel tried to keep his composure, knowing that losing control could cost him his career. At one point, he asked the neighbor to call emergency services to stop the situation. The police arrested Erica, but despite the seriousness of the incident, Daniel refused to press charges and she was soon released. This incident became a point of no return for Daniel, and he decided that their relationship was over. In January 2012, after only a year of official marriage, they divorced and moved apart. A few months after the divorce, Erica told her friends that she was pregnant with Daniel's child. The news quickly reached Daniel, and despite everything they had been through, he decided to try to start over for the sake of the future baby. They resumed their relationship and moved back in together. Daniel's family hoped that this time things would be different and that their arguments would be a thing of the past. Daniel did everything he could to maintain peace at home and eagerly awaited the birth of the baby. However, the problems did not go away. Erica often complained to her friend Angelica Ramirez about Daniel's harsh behavior. She claimed that Daniel could be cold and indifferent, and that she felt unhappy in the relationship. Angelica recalled that Erica would say that Daniel grabbed her by the neck and tried to choke her. She feared that one day it could end tragically. Angelica tried to support Erica, but understood her influence was limited. At the same time, Daniel's relatives and friends spoke about Erica's aggressive tendencies. She slashed mattresses and sofas, damaged Daniel's property. This was an example of uncontrolled behavior that she exhibited. The conflicts escalated month by month, but neither side sought help. Their relationship remained unstable, and the tension only continued to build. Daniel and Erica, despite their efforts to keep the family together, continued to live in constant tension. Friends and loved ones noticed that their relationship increasingly resembled a vicious cycle in which both suffered, but neither dared to change the situation. Both hid their problems, unwilling to seek help, and their story became a series of mutual accusations and suffering. On January 5, 2013, Erica gave birth to a son whom they named Aiden. At that moment, their relationship seemed to finally be improving. Daniel was thrilled to become a father and felt like his life had new meaning. For the sake of his family, he decided to sell his motorcycle, understanding that the safety and well-being of his loved ones were more important. This decision was not easy for him, but he did it for Aiden and for stability in their family. Daniel posted pictures with his son on social media. These were his moments of joy, his happy life. However, just 6 months later, the tension started building again. Constant conflicts and arguments became more frequent. Daniel suggested that Erica move out, and she agreed, but she took Aiden with her and completely cut off contact with her ex-husband. Unable to see his son, Daniel fell into a deep depression. He decided to fight for custody of Aiden, which led to the start of a serious conflict between them. These events unfolded against the backdrop of another incident that left a significant mark on Daniel's life. Shortly before Aiden's birth, during a motorcycle ride with a friend, Daniel's brakes suddenly failed. They pulled over, and Daniel discovered that some wires had been cut. He immediately suspected that Erica could have been responsible. When he returned home, he confronted her directly, but Erica denied everything. She insisted that she would never do anything that would threaten his life. Daniel chose not to involve the police and didn't tell anyone about the incident, preferring not to draw attention and to avoid further conflicts. Erica strongly disapproved of Daniel's passion for motorcycles. She considered them dangerous. Every time he returned from a ride, they argued, and the tension in their relationship only grew. The disputes about the motorcycle reached their peak after the incident with the cut brakes. Daniel realized that their relationship was becoming destructive, but he decided to keep things quiet, trying to control the situation and minimize the fallout. After selling the motorcycle and with the birth of his son, Daniel hoped that their family would enter a more peaceful period. But the conflicts and tension did not go away. In the fall of 2014, while Daniel and Erica were spending another night together, an incident occurred that left Daniel completely shaken. In the middle of the night, he woke up to find Erica standing over him with a gun. She was pointing it at him and said that she had a nightmare in which Daniel was unfaithful to her. She stated that she wanted to end his life so she wouldn't have to feel that pain anymore. Daniel managed to calm her down, assuring her that it was just a dream and that he had never betrayed her. Erica seemed to relax and lowered the gun. After this, Daniel realized that their relationship had become dangerous. He confided in his friends about the incident and decided it was time to end the destructive relationship for good. Despite this incident, in January 2015, they met again to celebrate their son Aiden's second birthday. At the family gathering held for close relatives, everyone saw Daniel and Erica chatting affectionately. Daniel even kissed her on the cheek, and many thought they were back together. However, Daniel knew that a future together was impossible and did not want to return to the old arguments and conflicts. After that meeting, Daniel told his friends that he had a new girlfriend, 20-year-old Brenda Vela. He posted a photo of them together on social media, sharing the happy news. He seemed genuinely happy, and many hoped that he was finally entering a new, calmer phase of his life. But soon a tragic event took place. On the morning of February 6, 2015, Daniel dropped Aiden off at Erica's house as they had planned. Afterward, he went to the gym. After his workout, he returned home, where his life came to a sudden end. Daniel went into the bathroom, sat down, and was shot 4 times in the arm, chest, neck, and forehead. He was killed instantly, without a chance to defend himself. The history of their relationship had always been filled with conflict and mutual accusations. Their text messages revealed constant aggression. Hundreds of messages were filled with anger and insults. Daniel accused Erica of trying to take away what was most precious to him, his son. Erica, in turn, accused him of selfishness and of being an unfit father. Their arguments ranged from parenting issues to personal attacks. There was no constructive dialogue, and the tension only continued to grow. But then, there was an unexpected reconciliation. None of their friends or relatives understood why they started spending time together again. On the surface, it appeared as if they were giving their relationship another chance. The arguments seemed to stop, and it looked like they had found some harmony. But as we know, this peace was temporary, and soon everything went back to the way it was before. Erica was brought in for questioning the day after Daniel's death. She claimed she hadn't been to his house in weeks, and had nothing to do with what had happened. Investigators informed her that they had footage from a neighboring home's surveillance camera, showing her entering the house on the day of the crime. In reality, Erica's identification from the video was inconclusive, but the investigators decided to use this tactic to make her panic. This strategy worked. Erica couldn't handle the pressure and confessed. She even pointed out where she had discarded the firearm used in the crime. The prosecutor argued that the motive for the crime was jealousy and the feeling of being replaced by another woman. When Erica was arrested, a note was found in her purse with Brenda's name and birth year, indicating that Erica had been tracking Daniel's new girlfriend. The evidence against her was compelling, but the trial didn't start until October 1st, 2019, 5 years after the tragic event. In the days leading up to the crime, Erica called Daniel about 170 times, trying to re-establish contact. She had learned that Daniel had introduced their son Aiden to Brenda, and that they were spending time together. This had pushed her over the edge. The prosecutor also stated that after the crime, Erica deleted several messages from Daniel's phone. These messages contained her attempts to convince Daniel that she would change and become better. However, Daniel had responded that he wanted nothing more to do with her and intended to move on. During the trial, Erica's attorney insisted that Daniel had been an abusive husband who subjected her to systematic aggression. Audio recordings of heated arguments were presented in which Daniel could be heard insulting and threatening Erica. These recordings became a crucial part of her defense, demonstrating that there was aggression and cruelty in their relationship. Erica, speaking in court, described in detail the instances of abuse she had endured over the years. She claimed that Daniel had physically assaulted her, grabbed her by the neck, and threatened her. Erica said she lived in constant fear and didn't report it to the police because she thought it would be useless. According to her, Daniel, being a police officer, could influence any investigation and was too powerful for her to expect justice. Erica believed that no one would believe her, as Daniel was a well-respected figure in the community. On February 5, 2015, the day before the crime, Erica claimed she had spoken to Daniel on the phone. According to her, they were flirting with each other, which gave her hope of rekindling their relationship. The next day, she decided to go to his house to see if it was possible to reconnect. When she entered the house, she saw 2 firearms on the table, which immediately made her uneasy. Erica decided to look around the house more carefully, and found a partially open safe in one of the rooms. Inside, she found 2 intimate photos of people who, in her opinion, appeared to be underage. This shocked her and led her to suspect that Daniel might pose a threat to their son. Erica claimed that seeing those photos changed her perception of Daniel. She remembered how he had made her wear school uniforms and began to understand that his interests might be much darker than she had thought. After putting the documents back, Erica heard the sound of a car pulling up. It was Daniel. Panicking, she grabbed both loaded firearms and hid in one of the rooms, not knowing what to do next. When Daniel entered the house, he walked through the rooms. Erica heard him head to the bathroom. With the firearms in her hands, she followed him, overwhelmed by fear. When she entered the bathroom, she saw Daniel sitting on the toilet. He noticed her and shouted angrily, threatening her. At that moment, according to her, she began shooting. She didn't remember how many shots she fired, but kept shooting until she felt the threat was gone. Then she ran out of the house, disposed of the weapons, and tried to flee. Erica also admitted that she continued to engage in intimate relations with Daniel, despite all the mistreatment, because she feared his reaction to refusal. She claimed that if she didn't satisfy him, he would become aggressive. This was one of the reasons she stayed with him. She feared the potential consequences of refusing or trying to stand up to his demands. She felt that her safety directly depended on complying with his wishes. Erica mentioned the photos she found in Daniel's safe for the first time during the trial. According to her, she had deliberately kept quiet about it during the investigation because she didn't trust the authorities and believed they would side with her ex-husband. Daniel's relatives were horrified by these claims and categorically refused to believe them. Erica insisted that she feared her words would be ignored or misinterpreted. However, Erica's claims were not substantiated. The officers who searched Daniel's home found no prohibited photos or any evidence supporting her accusations. The prosecutor insisted that everything Erica said was a lie, meant to avoid facing justice. Erica's attorney tried to portray Daniel in a negative light, pointing out that his phone and computer contained hundreds of intimate photos and videos involving adults. Furthermore, the attorney noted that over 1,000 images had been deleted from Daniel's phone years ago, which, in his view, could indicate dark secrets. Erica might have had legitimate reasons to fear him. Erica expressed regret for her actions and apologized to Daniel's family. She said she never wanted things to end so tragically, and her actions were driven by panic and fear for her son. Erica's attorney also argued that the blame for Daniel's death did not lie solely with Erica, but also with Daniel himself. They were trapped in a traumatic relationship from which neither could escape, and their fate seemed destined for a tragic end. The jury deliberated for nearly 4 days, but could not reach a unanimous decision, resulting in a mistrial. Erica's attorney considered this a success, as it provided an opportunity to revisit the case and develop a new defense strategy. Despite this, Erica was stripped of her parental rights, and Daniel's brother Matthew Green and his wife adopted Aiden. A new trial was scheduled for 2020, but was repeatedly postponed due to the pandemic. The most recent hearing took place in December 2022, but a final decision has yet to be made. Erica Sandoval is currently in custody awaiting trial. She faces the death penalty if found guilty. Attorneys for both sides continue to prepare for the next phase of the trial, which could be decisive in this complex case. This tragedy served as a lesson for many, reminding us how far jealousy and personal demons can lead if help is not sought and toxic relationships are not severed in time. Too many lives were destroyed, too much pain and too many unspoken words were left behind. Yet, even amid this darkness, there were those who continued to fight for a brighter future, doing everything possible for little Aiden's happiness. The story may have ended, but its echoes will be heard for a long time, reminding everyone of what can sometimes be hidden behind the closed doors of seemingly perfect homes. Case 2. Early in the morning on May 26, 2018, a staff member at a boarding school dormitory stumbled upon a scene that shocked everyone. In the stairwell of the girls' residence, the lifeless body of 17-year-old Charnel Hogg was found hanging near the railing. Just minutes later, authorities discovered a second victim, her best friend, Marna Engelbrecht. At first glance, everything pointed to a double tragedy, but subtle inconsistencies in the details began to surface. What initially appeared to be a heartbreaking loss soon evolved into a chilling and complex investigation that uncovered hidden facets of lives entangled in tension, obsession, and threats. Charnel Hogg lived on a farm in Delaryville, a small town in the northwest province of South Africa, with her father Ronnie, her stepmother Anna, and Anna's son Eston, whom she regarded as her brother. Charnel's parents divorced when she was young, but remained on amicable terms. Her father was a cattle farmer, while her mother, Sonia, worked in a tourism lodge in a nearby resort area. Before enrolling at Stella boarding school, Charnel split her time between her parents, spending 3 weeks on the farm with her father and 1 week with her mother. However, after starting school, her visits to her mother's home became less frequent. This change in Charnel's routine coincided with an unexpected reunion and rekindling of her friendship with Marna Engelbrecht. The two girls had been close friends since early childhood, but their bond had faded after Charnel moved. The Stella school environment brought them back together. Their families had shared deep connections for years. Marna's mother, Ryanette, had played music at Charnel's parents' wedding. Both families, rooted in farming traditions, often crossed paths at Sunday services and local community events. Charnel and Marna's friendship had blossomed during their kindergarten years and remained strong until life circumstances pulled them apart. The Northwest Province, where both families lived, was a rural area dominated by agriculture. Its landscape consisted of savannas and shrublands, and most residents earned their livelihoods through farming. Descendants of 17th century European settlers, known as Afrikaners, maintained a traditional way of life, even as their influence waned following the end of apartheid. This cultural continuity bonded the Hogg and Engelbrecht families, reflecting their shared heritage and values. 8 years after their childhood separation, fate brought Charnel and Marna together again at Stella boarding school. Both girls enrolled in 8th grade, and their friendship quickly rekindled. For Charnel, the boarding school, located in a small town far from her farm life, represented a significant shift from the familiarity of her family to the independence of boarding school life. Her father, occupied with managing the farm, and her mother, living at a distance, were no longer as present in her daily life. In this new environment, Charnel's friendship with Marna became an essential source of support and comfort. In March 2017, Charnel Hogg first noticed Xander, an 18-year-old graduate of the same boarding school she attended. He caught her attention with his athletic build, thick dark hair, and striking green eyes that complemented his confident demeanor. Although Xander had already graduated, he maintained ties with the local community and frequently visited areas near the boarding school. His family had a complicated history. His parents, Monty and Mercia, divorced when he was still young. Xander lived on his father's farm, located about 50 miles from Stella, but occasionally visited his mother, with whom he shared a less close relationship. Before Xander entered Charnel's life, her days were filled with shared interests and adventures alongside her best friend, Marna Engelbrecht. The two bonded over their love for animals and horseback riding, a hobby that remained central to their lives. Charnel also had a passion for photography and dreamed of turning it into a career, though her father, Ronnie, believed she had the potential to pursue modeling. Marna, a diligent student with a knack for math and science, aspired to become a veterinarian, inspired by her childhood experiences on the family farm. Marna lived with her parents near the town of Reberg. Her father, Stefan, was a well-respected drilling specialist who shared a close bond with his younger daughter, affectionately calling her Marna Thinker for her calm and thoughtful nature. Her mother, Rhiannette, worked as a caregiver, while her older sister, Rhianne, played a significant role in the family dynamic. Marna's family was known in the community for their close-knit relationships, and their life seemed harmonious and stable. The two friends shared a dorm room at the boarding school and spent most of their free time together. Charnel was known for her charisma, while Marna stood out for her intelligence and kindness. On weekends, they often returned to their respective homes, but occasionally stayed with one another's families. Ronnie, Charnel's father, treated Marna as if she were his own daughter, and both families shared warm and supportive ties. While the girls' lives appeared full of happiness and stability on the surface, this facade hid a far more complex reality. Xander, who had recently entered Charnel's life, carried a troubled past. The divorce of his parents and challenges during his childhood had shaped not only his outward confidence, but also an underlying tension within him. Xander's mother, Mercia, had always seen him as a special child. After enduring multiple heartbreaking struggles to become a mother, she gave birth to him despite a difficult pregnancy fraught with complications. His early health challenges only strengthened their bond, and Mercia became a highly protective and devoted mother, even as Xander grew older. In contrast, his father, Monty, a former police officer, raised Xander with strict discipline, instilling in him a love for sports, hunting, and outdoor activities. From a young age, Xander joined his father on fishing trips, shooting practice, and forest outings, which became integral to their time together. Despite his strong physical build, Xander had a complicated personality. During his school years, he was known for his success in rugby, but his temper often led to conflicts. Disagreements with teachers, arguments with classmates, and even confrontations with adults were common. His parents were frequently called to school meetings, but Mercia always defended her son, insisting that his behavior was just a way of expressing his individuality. After graduating, Xander decided not to pursue further education and began helping his father on the farm. His presence on social media was minimal, mostly limited to photos of firearms and hunting trophies highlighting his hobbies. Despite leading a relatively private life, his charisma and good looks drew attention, particularly from young women. It was at a school event that Charnel first took notice of Xander. Alumni, including Xander, had been invited to meet with current students. Their initial interaction was brief, but mutual attraction quickly led them to spend more time together. Charnel, then a senior in high school, was captivated by his confidence, athletic physique, and charm. Their relationship developed rapidly. In the first few weeks, Xander showered Charnel with attention, doing everything he could to make her happy. He came across as a caring and devoted partner. Later, when it was time to meet her family, Xander was eager to make a good impression. The meeting with Ronnie, Charnel's father, went better than expected. Initially cautious, Ronnie soon appreciated Xander's interest in farming. Xander's offer to help with farm work ultimately won him over. These moments marked the beginning of their shared story. However, beneath the surface of harmony, Xander's personality traits hinted at potential future challenges. His fiery temper and resistance to compromise had already surfaced in the past, and the impact these traits might have on the relationship was only a matter of time. Marna was the first to notice changes in Charnel's behavior. The friends she used to spend so much time with began avoiding her and communicating less often. At first, the changes were subtle, but they grew more apparent with each passing month. Charnel frequently found excuses to avoid meeting Marna or their other friends, citing busyness or fatigue. Marna noticed that these changes were connected to Xander and tried to gently inquire about what was happening. However, Charnel insisted that everything was fine. These changes began after Xander fully immersed himself in Charnel's social circle. At first, Xander's controls seemed subtle. He often asked who she was spending time with and what she was doing, which Charnel interpreted as care and concern. Gradually, he started demanding access to her phone, social media accounts, and messages. Charnel complied, thinking his jealousy was a reflection of his deep feelings for her. The situation came to a head during preparations for prom. Charnel, accompanied by her mother, went shopping for a dress. What should have been a joyful moment turned tense when Xander got involved. He insisted on approving her choice of dress, and even dictated that she wear minimal makeup and style her hair in a way he deemed acceptable. Wanting to avoid conflict, Charnel went along with his demands. She later confided in a few friends about feeling uneasy, but didn't fully recognize the gravity of the situation. Xander's controlling behavior continued to escalate. He began interfering in her friendships, openly disliking anyone he felt was a bad influence. If Charnel spent time with friends, he demanded detailed explanations. Over time, she started limiting her social interactions to avoid arguments. Even with Marna, her closest friend, their meetings became rare. Marna tried to talk to Charnel, pointing out that Xander's behavior was unacceptable. However, Charnel reassured herself and others that these were just temporary challenges stemming from Xander's personality. She believed he would change, but his control grew tighter, and his behavior became more aggressive. Even during family dinners with his relatives, Charnel noticed how closely Xander monitored her words and actions. Initially, Charnel's family, including Ronnie and Anna, approved of the relationship, but as time went on, they began noticing changes in her demeanor. She seemed less confident and more withdrawn, though they attributed it to academic stress. Only Marna saw the deeper issue and tried to reach out to her friend. However, Xander's influence continued to grow, leaving Charnel increasingly isolated. In January 2018, Charnel Hogg decided to end her relationship with Xander. This decision had been building for some time, as his behavior had become increasingly controlling and aggressive. By the end of the previous year, Charnel's family and friends began noticing the intense pressure he was placing on her, including constant monitoring of her phone and social media, as well as heated arguments where he would physically assert his dominance. Occasionally, marks left on Charnel after these confrontations raised alarm among those close to her, particularly Marna. The breakup triggered an extreme reaction from Xander. He began threatening to harm himself, claiming he couldn't live without her. These threats were accompanied by frequent messages in which he manipulated her emotions, hoping she would reconsider. Despite the stress this caused, Charnel stood firm this time. Her decision to leave the toxic relationship was final. During this period, Marna, Charnel's best friend, became entangled in the conflict. Xander accused her of turning Charnel against him and began sending Marna insulting and threatening messages. Alarmed, Marna confided in her father Stefan. He immediately intervened, contacting Xander and demanding that he stop the harassment. While this temporarily de-escalated the situation, Xander's hostility didn't disappear entirely. A few months after the breakup, Charnel began spending more time with Brandon Victor, a longtime friend she had known since she was 14. Brandon, a high school senior with an excellent reputation, was known for his kindness and athletic accomplishments. He provided Charnel with much-needed emotional support, listening to her and helping her cope with the lingering pressure from Xander. Their friendship gradually developed into a closer relationship, but they chose to keep it private, knowing that Xander still exhibited an unhealthy obsession with Charnel. Even after the breakup, Xander refused to let Charnel move on. He stalked her, showing up unexpectedly in places she frequented, and continued sending her messages. This behavior made Charnel and Brandon cautious. They avoided public places where they might encounter Xander, and kept their relationship discreet to avoid provoking him further. May 2018 marked a turning point. Despite her efforts to reclaim her peace of mind, Charnel continued to feel the weight of Xander's persistent interference. His refusal to accept her decision and his ongoing attempts to involve himself in her life created a tense and increasingly volatile atmosphere around her and those close to her. Resolving the situation would require decisive action as the pressure continued to mount. Early on the morning of May 26, 2018, an unusual stillness hung over the boarding school dormitory. A staff member, Crystal, began her day around 6 a.m., walking through the hallways to check if students were awake. As she passed by the restroom, something caught her attention: dark strands of hair on the floor. At first, she assumed it was just leftover hair from brushing and didn't think much of it. However, as she approached the staircase leading to the ground floor, she noticed a green nylon rope tied tightly across the railing. Moments later, Crystal froze in her tracks as she saw a pair of feet in white socks dangling above the floor. A few hours earlier, at approximately 4:17 a.m., Sonia, Charnel's mother, woke up at her home in Coster to find a troubling message from her daughter. The text read, "Mom, I just wanted to say I love you and I'm sorry." The misspelling of the word sorry caught Sonia's attention immediately, as Charnel was always careful with her grammar. Alarmed, Sonia tried calling her daughter, but the call went straight to voicemail. Worried, she called her ex-husband, Ronnie, to ask if he had heard from Charnel. Ronnie, who had been asleep, reassured Sonia that everything had seemed normal the night before, but he decided to check his phone. Among the late-night messages from Charnel, two stood out, leaving him deeply unsettled. The first message, sent at 3:42 a.m., included a photo of Charnel in her undergarments and a caption that read, "I love you, Brandon." The second, sent at 4:17 a.m., said, "Dad, I'm sorry, Marna and I are leaving." The cryptic and troubling nature of these messages made Ronnie fear for the girl's safety. He immediately contacted the school's principal, Richard Hobson, to report his concerns. Meanwhile, Crystal, trying to piece together what was happening, went upstairs to Charnel and Marna's room. It was empty. The girls' personal belongings were neatly arranged, as if they had been preparing for the next day without a hint of distress. At that moment, Crystal realized the situation was far more serious than she initially thought, and returned to the staircase where she had spotted the rope. At the same time, the worrying messages were reaching the girl's parents, and Brandon, Charnel's boyfriend, also received a late-night text from her. The message was unexpected, and his immediate attempts to call her went unanswered. Although Brandon didn't fully understand what was happening, he began to sense that something was terribly wrong. The morning, which was supposed to start with preparations for a rugby match, quickly descended into chaos. Rumors about a serious incident spread rapidly among the students, and by the time Ronnie and Sonia arrived at the boarding school, desperate to find out what had happened, the atmosphere was tense and filled with uncertainty. Early on the morning of May 26, 2018, Richard Hobson, the headmaster of a boarding school, received a frantic call from Crystal, one of the dormitory supervisors. Her voice was tense and panicked as she explained that she had discovered the body of Charnel Hogg, one of the students, hanging from the staircase railing in the dormitory building. Stunned by the news, Hobson attempted to get more details, but the call abruptly ended as Crystal dropped the phone and ran to find help. Meanwhile, Charnel's father, Ronnie, learned of the tragedy through a brief call from the school's principal. The message was devastating. Both Charnel and her friend, Marna, had been found dead. Overwhelmed and desperate for answers, Ronnie contacted his brother, Louis, to accompany him to the school. As they drove, Ronnie replayed the strange late-night messages he had received from his daughter, trying to make sense of the situation. At the school, Hobson and staff worked quickly to shield the students from the horrifying scene. By the time police arrived in the morning, they discovered not only Charnel's body hanging from the staircase, but also a second body, that of Marna, found in the first-floor bathroom. A strap from a backpack was tightly fastened around her neck. Initial police assumptions that the two girls had chosen to end their lives were soon challenged. Investigators noted that the marks on their necks were inconsistent with the signs typically seen in such cases, raising suspicions of foul play. As police examined the scene, Ronnie arrived at the school and rushed toward his daughter's body hanging from the railing. Officers tried to stop him, warning that disturbing the scene could compromise evidence, but Ronnie, overcome with grief, ignored their pleas. It was only with Louis's help that Charnel's body was eventually taken down. At the same time, Marna's father, Stevens, also arrived at the school. Upon seeing his daughter, he was overcome with anger and immediately declared that this was no accident. He voiced his suspicion of Xander, Charnel's ex-boyfriend, whom he believed could be involved. Amid the chaos at the school, Principal Hobson decided to call in private investigator Chris Sanders, a professional he had worked with before. Sanders arrived within hours and began gathering information. One of the first people he interviewed was Brandon Victor, Charnel's current boyfriend. Brandon revealed that he had received messages from her during the night, but couldn't fully understand their meaning. He also shared that Xander had continued to display an unhealthy obsession with Charnel and had made threats against her after their breakup. The investigators collected enough evidence to suspect the involvement of a third party. The rope found on the staircase and the backpack strap around Marna's neck were carefully analyzed. Fingerprints on these items were considered critical in determining what had occurred. Xander's name came up repeatedly in conversations among students, prompting Detective Sanders to identify him as the primary suspect. Meanwhile, Stevens, Marna's father, grew impatient with the pace of the investigation. Taking matters into his own hands, he went to Xander's home to confront him and demand answers. This action threatened to escalate the situation, potentially creating further complications for the investigation. Around midnight on May 25, 2018, Charnel, Marna, and Brandon were sitting in the girls' dormitory room. Brandon had sneaked in, violating strict school rules, to comfort Charnel, who was feeling increasingly uneasy due to threats she had been receiving from her ex-boyfriend, Xander. They drank coffee and talked, but Charnel's tension became more apparent as the night went on. At 1 a.m., Charnel's phone rang. It was Xander. She put the call on speaker so Marna and Brandon could hear the conversation. At first, Xander spoke calmly, trying to persuade her to come outside and meet him. When she refused, his tone shifted dramatically. He began making threats, ending the call with a chilling warning. "You'll regret what I'm going to do tonight." Charnel was visibly shaken. Brandon offered to stay with her, but she insisted he return to the boys' dormitory, fearing punishment if his presence was discovered. Around 2 a.m., Brandon left. It was the last time he saw the girls alive. The following morning, on May 26th, after learning about the deaths of Charnel and Marna, Marna's father, Stevens, went to Xander's home, determined to get answers. Arriving at the farm, he confronted Xander and his father, Monty. In his grief and anger, Stevens accused Xander of being involved in the tragedy. The confrontation quickly escalated into a heated argument, which was interrupted by private investigator Chris Sanders, who had just arrived on the scene. Displaying a calm demeanor, Sanders convinced Stevens to step back and persuaded Xander to accompany him to the police station. On the drive there, Sanders began questioning Xander, applying steady pressure. Eventually, Xander broke down and confessed to the crime. He admitted that he had killed Charnel out of jealousy and then murdered Marna to eliminate a witness. Sanders recorded the confession on a voice recorder. At the scene, police were already collecting evidence. The marks on the girls' bodies and the circumstances surrounding their deaths pointed to foul play, and Xander's confession aligned with investigators' suspicions. After arriving at the station, Xander repeated his account of the events. During questioning, Xander detailed how he had planned the crimes, intending to stage them as voluntary acts to avoid suspicion. He described sneaking into the dormitory and carrying out his actions. Investigators also uncovered disturbing evidence of his obsession with Charnel. Messages, photos, and journal entries stored on his phone. At Xander's trial in March 2019, his behavior and motives became the central focus. One of the most critical pieces of testimony came from Anastasia Fesser, an acquaintance of Xander's from fishing competitions. She recounted a phone call she received from him the day before the tragedy, during which he angrily declared that he wouldn't let Charnel live her life without him. His chilling statement about making her life unbearable now stood out as a direct warning of what was to come. Anastasia admitted that she hadn't taken Xander's words seriously at the time, dismissing them as an emotional outburst. However, looking back, she regretted not reporting his comments to the police or warning anyone close to Charnel, and her testimony became a crucial part of the trial, shedding light on Xander's obsession and the premeditated nature of his actions. During the trial, Brandon Victor, Charnel's new boyfriend, provided key testimony. Brandon recounted how, on the evening of May 24, 2018, he secretly snuck into the girls' dormitory to spend time with Charnel and Marna. They talked, laughed, and discussed recent events, trying to lighten the tense atmosphere. However, their evening was interrupted by a call from Xander. Charnel put the phone on speaker so Brandon and Marna could hear the conversation. At first, Xander spoke calmly, trying to persuade her to meet him. When she refused, his tone became threatening, ending with a chilling statement that she would regret her decision. After the call, Charnel was visibly frightened, but insisted that Brandon return to the boys' dormitory, worried they'd get in trouble if anyone found out he was there. This decision marked the last time Brandon saw Charnel and Marna alive. The following day, police discovered their bodies, setting off the investigation that ultimately led to Xander's arrest. The defense attempted to challenge the validity of the evidence, arguing that Xander's confession had been coerced. However, testimony from private investigator Chris Sanders and recordings of Xander's statements dismantled their argument. Psychological evaluations described Xander as emotionally unstable, with a pathological fixation on Charnel. His jealousy, obsessive need for control, and inability to cope with their breakup were identified as factors leading to the tragedy. The role of Xander's family also came under scrutiny. His mother, who had been overly protective of him since childhood, had consistently defended him, disregarding concerning behavior. Initially, his father, Monty, a former police officer, acknowledged his son's guilt and stated that justice needed to be served. However, after the sentencing, which included 2 life terms, Monty reversed his position, accusing the legal system of being unjust and hiring lawyers to appeal the verdict. For the families of Charnel and Marna, there was some comfort in knowing the 2 inseparable friends were now laid to rest beside each other. This case highlights the importance of recognizing hidden issues in interpersonal relationships and taking proactive steps to prevent tragedies. It also raises questions about the role of upbringing and emotional support in shaping an individual's character and how unresolved emotional struggles can lead to devastating outcomes. Case 3. Samara, 2025. A shocking and disturbing crime rattled the city, becoming one of the most sensational cases in recent history. A former mayor, a powerful political figure, and his wife mysteriously vanished. Their disappearance set off a wave of concern among those close to them, triggering an extensive search. But soon, investigators uncovered a grim reality. The prime suspect? Their own granddaughter. Security cameras recorded her handling a suspicious barrel. Traces of chemical substances were found in the apartment, and the victim's financial assets suddenly appeared in questionable transactions. Every clue pointed to a carefully orchestrated act. But what could have driven her to such an extreme? Financial struggles? Mounting debt? Or something far darker? Why has she remained silent since being taken into custody? And was she really acting alone? Samara is a city with a deep history and a strategically significant location along the Volga River in Russia. It is a major industrial hub where business is tightly interwoven with politics and exclusive elite circles. During the 1990s, a unique balance formed between government power, big business, and underground networks. The local elite wielded influence far beyond the region, and their wealth was often built on oil revenues, covert deals, and behind-the-scenes political maneuvers. One of the key figures in Samara's elite was Viktor Tarkov. His name was known to everyone, from government officials to influential underworld figures. He wasn't just the head of the city, he controlled a significant part of its economy. Born in Kubyshev, Tarkov climbed the ranks from Soviet-era chemical engineer to successful businessman, eventually becoming a high-ranking official, and finally the mayor of Samara. This position only increased his influence, but also earned him powerful enemies. The Tarkov family wasn't just wealthy, it was a dynasty, accustomed to power and luxury. Viktor Tarkov owned high-end real estate, vast land holdings, and a fleet of luxury cars, while his family enjoyed all the privileges that came with his status. But behind the facade of prosperity lurked serious issues. Ekaterina Tarkova, Viktor's granddaughter, was born in 1995 in Samara, growing up in an environment where wealth and influence were simply a way of life. Her mother, Lyudmila Tarkova, was raised as the heir to a powerful family, while her father, Sergei Laganov, was known in certain circles under the nickname Lord. From an early age, Lyudmila was drawn to questionable circles. Despite having access to the best education and the countless opportunities provided by her father, she chose a carefree and indulgent lifestyle. By the 1990s, she was fully immersed in the underground world, surrounded by figures from organized networks, where she felt completely at ease. Her first husband, Konstantin Sherbakov, had ties to a well-known criminal group in Samara and lost his life in 2001. After his passing, Lyudmila became involved with Sergei Laganov, a man not only connected to underground operations, but also a key player in large-scale oil fraud schemes that brought in millions. In 2010, he was arrested for allegedly orchestrating an attack on a federal agent, which ultimately landed him behind bars. But Ludmila didn't stray far from his path. She developed strong ties with organized groups, participated in fraudulent schemes, and eventually found herself facing legal consequences as well. By the summer of 2021, Ludmila Tarkova was at the center of a highly publicized legal case. She tried to extort a huge sum of money from Alexander Maliev, a deputy of the regional parliament, threatening to publicize defamatory personal information. However, her plan quickly unraveled. Maliev immediately contacted law enforcement. In December 2022, Tarkova was arrested, and shortly after, the court found her guilty. She was sentenced to 7 years in a general regime correctional facility. Meanwhile, Ekaterina Tarkova's teenage years were marked by complete freedom and an absence of supervision. As the granddaughter of a powerful political figure, she never faced financial struggles and had little understanding of the true value of money. Unlike her peers, she was never given spending limits, pressured to succeed academically, or expected to follow strict rules. This lack of boundaries created a sense of entitlement that only grew stronger with time. From a young age, Ekaterina embraced a life of luxury. She was drawn to high-end fashion brands, exclusive parties, and connections with influential people. During those years, Samara's nightlife scene thrived, and Tarkova quickly found herself surrounded by the city's elite youth, the sons and daughters of wealthy families for whom lavish entertainment was a way of life. In this environment, alcohol and prohibited substances were commonplace. Ekaterina never concerned herself with the future. Her grandfather provided everything she needed, and her mother, preoccupied with her own criminal dealings, never interfered in her life. The real problems began when Ekaterina became heavily involved with illicit substances, and her behavior started to over time. Her dependency grew stronger, and she found it increasingly difficult to function without regular access. Her social circle changed as well. She became surrounded by people willing to offer her anything she wanted in exchange for money, favors, or influence. Despite receiving generous financial support from her grandfather, her spending habits spiraled out of control, surpassing the allowances she was given. In 2016, when her reputation in Samara was already far from spotless, she met an Israeli citizen while in Cyprus. Their relationship developed rapidly, and before long, they were married. Ekaterina took her husband's last name, becoming Belskaya. In 2017, they had a son. However, family life did not change her lifestyle. She continued to cause scandals, frequently drank, and struggled to control her emotions. Her husband could no longer tolerate it, and after 2 years, he filed for divorce. After the separation, Ekaterina returned to Samara, leaving her son in the care of his grandparents. Once again, her family fully supported her. Her grandfather, Viktor Tarkov, continued to provide financial assistance despite her behavior. However, even that was not enough for her. Ekaterina spent massive amounts on entertainment and prohibited substances, but for the first time, she began to experience financial difficulties as the flow of money slowed down. By 2020, her situation had become critical. She attempted to go through rehabilitation, but soon relapsed, returning to her previous lifestyle. Her behavior became even more erratic. She still had the same expensive habits, but now she lacked the money to support them. In desperation, she started selling her belongings, designer handbags, jewelry, phones, and even religious icons gifted by her grandparents. Family heirlooms meant nothing to her. At that moment, cash was her only priority. Over time, Ekaterina began borrowing money from acquaintances, but people quickly lost trust in her. Her debts grew, and creditors became more persistent in demanding repayment. She found herself in a dead end. She had no legal income and no interest in getting a job. Realizing that his granddaughter had no intention of changing, Viktor Tarkov started cutting back on her financial support. To Ekaterina, this was a betrayal rather than an attempt to help. She was convinced that he was obligated to continue providing for her. Family tensions escalated, and arguments turned into open hostility. Ekaterina no longer hid her resentment, openly blaming her grandparents for all of her problems. Over time, her anger only intensified. At some point, she came to a chilling realization. The only way to solve her financial problems for good was to remove the people standing between her and her inheritance. By 2023, Catherine's financial situation had deteriorated dramatically. Her debts were mounting. She had borrowed from various sources, some from acquaintances, some from high-interest loan companies, and the rest from individuals who were not known for their patience when it came to repayment. She promised several lenders that she would settle her debts soon, but in reality, she had no way of making the payments. The pressure from creditors mounted, and the calls and threats became more intense. At this point, Ekaterina began attempting to sell her family's assets. Desperate for money, she started looking for buyers for valuable possessions that belonged to her relatives. Her focus shifted to antique religious icons, jewelry, and even her grandmother's car. According to the investigation, she successfully sold some of these items. But even that wasn't enough. That's when Ekaterina began considering selling real estate registered under Viktor Tarkov's name. However, her grandfather, an experienced and cautious man, maintained strict control over his assets and would never allow her to handle his property without his approval. She realized that as long as he was alive, she would never have full access to his wealth. In early January 2025, Viktor and Natalia Tarkov suddenly stopped responding to calls. Relatives, friends, and business associates attempted to reach them, but their phones remained off. Their disappearance quickly raised concerns. These were not the kind of people who would suddenly go off the grid, especially Viktor Tarkov, who was always in contact, even with former colleagues and business partners. When he failed to respond to birthday greetings on January 3, 2025, it immediately alarmed those close to him. The first to raise the alarm was Tarkov's former deputy. After repeatedly trying to call Viktor with no success, he received a strange message. All questions to Katya. This seemed highly suspicious. Tarkov was known for his proper grammar and punctuation, but the writing style in this message was completely different. Attempts to reach the couple continued, but to no avail. Concerned, Tarkov's assistant finally filed a missing persons report with the authorities. Once the report was filed, the police launched an investigation immediately. Detectives first checked the Tarkov's residence, reviewed their latest financial transactions, and analyzed surveillance footage. Soon, disturbing details began to emerge, pointing to Ekaterina Tarkova's unusual behavior. Suspicions deepened after investigators examined her financial activity. In the days leading up to her relative's disappearance, she had made questionable purchases and then attempted to cover up any evidence of their presence in the apartment. When the investigative team arrived at the Tarkovs' home, they were met with an unsettling scene. Although there were no obvious signs of a struggle, the residence appeared suspiciously clean. Forensic specialists detected traces of chemical agents commonly used to eliminate biological evidence. During a thorough inspection of the apartment, forensic specialists used advanced equipment to detect hidden traces not visible to the naked eye. In the bathroom and kitchen, they discovered biological residue, which, after laboratory analysis, was confirmed to contain blood. DNA testing identified the traces as belonging to Viktor and Natalia Tarkov. The small amount of blood suggested to investigators that the cause of death did not involve significant blood loss. Investigators were also drawn to purchases Ekaterina had made in the weeks leading up to her relative's disappearance. According to transaction records, she had ordered plastic containers, chemical substances, heavy-duty bags, and protective suits online. These purchases stood out as suspicious, as they had no clear household purpose. Additionally, her financial situation at the time was unstable, and these large expenses were inconsistent with her usual spending habits. Further analysis of her recent actions revealed that Ekaterina had also started rapidly liquidating her grandparents' belongings. Within a short period, she listed several valuable possessions for sale, including antique religious icons, jewelry, and a Toyota RAV4 that had belonged to Natalia Tarkova. The quick sale of such expensive items raised red flags for investigators, as there was no evidence that the rightful owners had willingly transferred control of their property to her. At the same time, law enforcement obtained detailed records of Viktor and Natalia's phone calls and messages. Analysis showed that their mobile phones remained active even after their presumed disappearance. Messages were sent from their numbers to friends and family, claiming the couple had left town. However, a linguistic examination of these texts revealed inconsistencies in writing style and phrasing, leading investigators to suspect that someone else had been using their devices. Another red flag was Ekaterina's access to her grandfather's phone to log into his online banking account. Investigators discovered that after Viktor Tarkov's disappearance, there had been multiple attempts to carry out financial transactions from his accounts. Although she was unable to fully access the funds, The mere fact that she tried to use his finances while his whereabouts remained unknown became a key piece of evidence. Once enough evidence had been gathered, authorities moved to detain Ekaterina Tarkova. The operation was carried out at her grandfather's apartment, where she had continued to live even after his disappearance. During her arrest, Ekaterina remained surprisingly calm. She did not resist, express outrage, or even ask why she was being detained. There were no visible signs of distress or anxiety, which seemed unusual for someone suspected of a serious crime. After being taken to the police station, she was interrogated. During the initial questioning, Ekaterina refused to provide testimony, claiming she was feeling unwell. Investigators continued their work and presented her with the evidence they had gathered. However, instead of offering clear explanations, she began changing her version of events. Her statements contradicted each other, and her reasoning did not hold up under scrutiny. As the investigation progressed, additional evidence was uncovered, helping to piece together a possible timeline of the crime. Detectives analyzed surveillance footage, witness statements, and digital traces left on her phone and computer. These findings provided a clearer picture of what had transpired. Ekaterina's primary defense strategy was complete denial of involvement. She insisted that she knew nothing about her relatives' whereabouts and claimed she had sold their belongings at their request. However, the evidence painted a different picture. Investigators continued reconstructing the chain of events, uncovering more proof that pointed to her involvement. Crime timeline possible theories. The exact sequence of events remains unclear, but investigators have considered several possible scenarios. Poisoning. One theory suggests that Ekaterina may have planned the crime in advance by adding a toxic substance to her relatives' food or drinks. This would explain the lack of struggle and the minimal blood traces in the apartment. However, forensic analysis has yet to find conclusive proof of poisoning. Blunt force trauma. Another possibility is that the victims were attacked quickly, possibly with strikes to the head. The absence of significant blood at the scene suggests that the crime may have been carried out in this manner. A rapid and forceful attack could have resulted in immediate fatal injuries, after which the perpetrator may have taken steps to dispose of the remains. Strangulation. This scenario is considered one of the most likely. If the perpetrator wanted to avoid making noise, this method would have been a logical choice. However, investigators have not yet presented sufficient evidence to confirm this theory. After the crime was committed, Ekaterina needed to dispose of the remains, and investigators believe she resorted to extreme measures. Surveillance footage captured Ekaterina bringing a large blue plastic barrel into the apartment. Later, the same container was seen outside the building. Investigators suspect that it may have been used to transport the victim's remains. Additionally, chemical substances were found in the case, which may have been used to accelerate decomposition. Some media outlets reported that human remains were allegedly discovered in the apartment's refrigerator, but no official confirmation of this claim has been provided. However, forensic experts did detect microscopic traces of blood throughout the apartment, despite apparent attempts to clean the space thoroughly. As the investigation progressed, each new piece of evidence further reinforced the theory that Ekaterina Tarkova was directly involved in the disappearance and likely the deaths of her relatives. A curious detail emerged. Shortly before this, Ekaterina had claimed she had broken her leg and was using crutches to get around. However, on the day she was seen carrying bags in the barrel, the crutches had mysteriously disappeared, and she appeared to be walking normally. Additionally, neighbors reported seeing an unidentified man near her during this time, someone who may have assisted her in moving the container. His identity remains unknown, and authorities are still working to verify his involvement. Investigators suspect that Ekaterina disposed of the remains in parts, discarding them in dumpsters across different areas of Samara. The waste from these locations was later transported to the Preobrazhenka landfill. Law enforcement officers initiated a search at the landfill. However, too much time had passed, and the sheer volume of waste, measured in dozens of tons, made the search nearly impossible. Another theory suggests that some remains may have been destroyed using chemical agents or other means, though no direct evidence has been found to confirm this. Once the investigation was completed and all evidence was gathered, prosecutors officially charged Ekaterina Tarkova. She was accused of committing a double homicide with the intent of seizing her relatives' assets, as well as desecrating the remains. The trial sparked widespread public interest, not only because the suspect was the granddaughter of a former mayor, but also due to the particularly brutal nature of the crime. After Ekaterina Tarkova was arrested for the crime involving her grandparents, investigators explored the possibility of her mother's involvement. The question was logical. Could Ludmila, even while serving her sentence, have influenced her daughter or had a motive for their deaths? However, no direct evidence linking her to the crime was found. At the time of the incident, she had already been in prison for several years and had no physical ability to orchestrate it. Nevertheless, her role in shaping Ekaterina's mindset was undeniable. From an early age, Ludmila demonstrated that power and money could be obtained through deception, manipulation, and crime. Ekaterina absorbed this worldview, which ultimately led her to commit an unthinkable act. Prosecutors sought a life sentence for Ekaterina, arguing that the crime was committed with financial intent and extreme cruelty. One of the lingering questions during the trial was whether she had an accomplice. Investigators considered the possibility that Ekaterina could not have carried out such a complex act alone. The main person of interest was a man named Vitaly, an inmate she had met while visiting her mother in prison. Authorities discovered that Ekaterina had maintained close contact with him. Phone records showed that she frequently called him before the crime and had also transferred money to his account. However, there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime. While the court considered the possibility that he may have acted as a coordinator, there was not enough proof to charge him at the time of sentencing. Ekaterina Tarkova's case became one of the most sensational criminal stories in recent years. Public opinion was divided. Some saw her as a cold-blooded criminal who committed the act for financial gain, while others speculated that she was being controlled by more powerful forces. However, most people agreed on one thing. The crime was inhumane and deserved the harshest punishment. As of now, court proceedings are still ongoing and are being broadcast on national television, while journalists continue to reveal new details about Ekaterina's life, her struggles with prohibited substances, and her debts. The public was stunned that the granddaughter of such an influential figure could commit such an act against her own family for money. According to recent reports, Ekaterina Tarkova has stopped speaking due to severe stress. During interrogations and court hearings, she has remained silent and appeared detached. One theory suggests that she may have developed mutism, a condition in which a person loses the ability to speak or respond to questions. Another possibility is a stupor-like state, a condition characterized by impaired consciousness, while basic reflexes remain intact. In the coming days, Ekaterina is expected to undergo a psychiatric evaluation at the Samara Psychiatric Hospital to assess her mental state and rule out the possibility of feigned symptoms. The examination is expected to last at least 30 days. After the murder of Viktor and Natalia Tarkova, the question of inheritance remained. According to preliminary data, the property of former mayor was estimated at 145 million rubles. However, Ekaterina was stripped of any inheritance rights. Under the law, individuals convicted of a crime against their benefactors are legally barred from claiming their assets. This left one potential heir, Ekaterina's young son, who was placed under the care of social services after her arrest. His father, an Israeli citizen, learned about the situation through news reports. While the court considered granting custody to him, Russian authorities were in no hurry to finalize the decision. By court ruling, Viktor Tarkov's estate was to be transferred to the next legal heir. Since Ekaterina was disqualified from claiming the inheritance, the matter remained unresolved. As of February 19, 2025, the trial of Ekaterina Tarkova has not yet concluded, and no verdict has been issued. She remains in custody until April 2, 2025. Authorities continue investigating the potential involvement of other individuals, including Vitaly Lukin, an inmate with whom Ekaterina had maintained contact. However, no direct evidence has been presented linking him to the crime. Ekaterina's attorney told reporters that his client continues to remain silent and has not commented on the charges against her. A person may pretend to be in love for various reasons, but most often, it happens when they have a specific goal in mind. Whether it's financial gain, a desire for intimacy, or an attempt to turn a situation in their favor. However, for the person on the other side of the deception, everything feels very real. And the further this game of emotions goes, the more shocking the outcome can be. The case of Brenda Miquela Gordillo sent shockwaves through Argentina due to its unexplainable cruelty. No one could have imagined that a seemingly casual romance between college students would take such a tragic turn. Brenda Miquela Gordillo was born on May 16, 1995, in the Argentine province of Catamarca. She was the youngest of 3 siblings and the only daughter in a middle-class family. Raised alongside her 2 older brothers, Ivan and Federico, she was always under their protection and care. She also had a particularly close bond with her mother, Florencia. Brenda was a bright student, responsible, organized, and determined. She thrived in social settings, easily getting along with others while avoiding conflicts and resolving disputes peacefully. Given her natural ability to mediate situations, it wasn't surprising that she decided early on to pursue a career in psychology to help people. From a young age, Brenda was involved in gymnastics and dance, participated in school theater productions, and enjoyed being on stage. She had a large circle of friends, and people were naturally drawn to her, often seeking her advice and valuing her opinion. After graduating high school, she was accepted into a prestigious university in the capital, where she studied psychology with a focus on negotiation and conflict resolution. She quickly became one of the top students in her program, with professors predicting a promising future for her. Brenda had plans to stay in the capital and build her career there, until a tragic event changed everything. During her second to last year of college one evening, she received a call from her brother, who delivered devastating news. Their father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The loss was a huge shock for the entire family, but especially for their mother, who was now left alone in the family home. By that time, Brenda's brothers were already married and living separately, while she was still in Buenos Aires pursuing her degree. After completing her studies, Brenda returned to her hometown in Catamarca to be with her mother. She found a job, and at the same time decided to further her education by enrolling in law school at a local university. Immersed in student life once again, she made new friends, one of whom was a young man named Naim Vera. Naim Vera was born on June 11, 1999, in Catamarca. He was the younger of 2 sons in a well-known and affluent family of distinguished doctors. His father was a leading cardiac surgeon, and his mother was a pediatrician with a private practice. Naim grew up alongside his older brother, Jamie, who was his complete opposite. Their parents provided them with the best opportunities, but while Jamie was ambitious and dreamed of following in their footsteps by becoming a doctor, Naim was different. From an early age, he was lazy, entitled, and self-absorbed. With striking looks and a natural charm, he was always well-dressed in designer clothes and maintained a confident persona that made him popular. Girls at school were infatuated with him, and he knew how to leave an impression. During his later school years, Naim began experimenting with prohibited substances, which led to trouble on more than one occasion. However, due to his family's influence, he never faced any real consequences. He developed a reputation for arrogance and hostility, with numerous incidents linked to bullying, physical altercations, and aggressive behavior. Despite his privileged upbringing, his temperament often overshadowed everything else. In 2018, Naim graduated from high school and decided to turn his life around, leaving behind reckless decisions and bad habits. He underwent treatment for dependency issues and was eventually accepted into law school. It was there that he met Brenda, and he was immediately drawn to her. Brenda was also instantly attracted to the confident and bold young man. At the time of their meeting, she was 23 while he had just turned 19. Despite the noticeable age gap, she welcomed his attention. On the very first day they met, they spent hours talking at a bar, and later that night, they went to an apartment owned by Naim's parents, for which he had a key. That night, their relationship became intimate, and from that moment on, they began seeing each other regularly. For the first time in her life, Brenda felt truly in love, and it was obvious to everyone around her. Friends and family noticed the change. She seemed happier than ever. However, none of them had actually met the man who had stolen her heart. Although Brenda spoke about him often, she only showed her mother and brother pictures of Naim from social media, casually mentioning that he was her future fiancé. As time passed, it became clear that Naim had no intention of introducing Brenda to his family or friends. Their relationship remained confined to the same apartment, and they never appeared in public as a couple. It was strange, but Brenda convinced herself that he simply needed more time. Deep down, she also feared that Naim was hesitant because of their age difference. The secret meetings continued for months, and Brenda remained deeply invested in the relationship. Despite Naim gradually becoming more distant, she refused to acknowledge the shift in his behavior, holding on to the idea that their bond was still strong. One day, Brenda received a call from an unfamiliar number. The man on the other end introduced himself as Naeem's cousin and gave her a warning. He urged her to be careful. He claimed that Naeem had a history of aggression, and that if not for his influential parents, he would have already faced serious legal consequences for his past actions. The caller advised Brenda to end the relationship before it was too late, but she refused to listen. In mid-February 2019, Brenda discovered that she was pregnant. The news came as a complete surprise, but despite the initial shock, she felt genuinely happy. She believed this would be the turning point in their relationship, that it would push Naeem to take things more seriously and finally commit to her. During their next meeting, Brenda shared the news. At first, Naeem was speechless, but then his demeanor changed drastically. He became furious, insisting that he was not ready for fatherhood and that having a baby was not part of his immediate plans. He pressured Brenda to terminate the pregnancy, promising to cover all expenses. Brenda refused outright. She explained that she had health complications, and the fact that she was expecting was nothing short of a miracle. The argument escalated, and Naeem told Brenda it would be best if they ended things for good. For a while, they stopped seeing each other, though they continued exchanging messages on social media. Brenda confided in a close friend during this time, admitting that she missed him terribly and still hoped they would reunite. She even said she had never loved anyone as much as she loved him. At the end of February, Naeem finally called her. He suggested they meet in person to have a calm discussion. Brenda was overjoyed, convinced that he had changed his mind. She shared the news with her best friend, who reassured her that everything would work out. The meeting was set for the night of February 28, 2019. That evening, Brenda had been invited to a birthday party for one of her classmates. After the celebration, she went to Naeem's apartment and never came out again. The next day, Friday, March 1st, Brenda did not show up for her university classes, which was highly unusual for her. She had never missed a lecture without a valid reason, and now no one could reach her. No one knew where she was. Brenda's mother was aware of the birthday party, and her daughter had told her she wouldn't be coming home that night. However, she didn't specify whether she would stay with a friend or her boyfriend. She had planned to go straight to class in the morning, so at first her mother wasn't alarmed. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when the university called to ask about Brenda's whereabouts, that she realized something was wrong. Friends and family immediately started searching for her. Everyone knew she wouldn't just disappear without telling anyone. Still, at that moment, there was hope. Perhaps she had simply lost track of time while with Naeem. But as her loved ones frantically made calls trying to get any information, another event unfolded, one that changed everything. Any lingering hope vanished in an instant. Brenda was gone. On the morning of March 1st, 2019, Naeem Vera walked into the Catamarca police station, accompanied by his father and 2 attorneys. The young man stated that he wanted to confess and tell the authorities about a tragic event that had occurred the night before. He was taken to an interrogation room, where he calmly shared his version of events. Though he appeared visibly distressed, he maintained his composure and spoke with confidence. Naeem claimed that he had arranged to meet a female acquaintance at his apartment that evening for an intimate encounter. According to him, they had spent time together like this before, with no commitments or expectations. However, on this particular night, an argument broke out between them, and he asked her to leave immediately. The apartment had 2 levels, connected by a staircase. Naeem alleged that during the heated exchange, Brenda took a step back, lost her balance, and tumbled down the stairs. He insisted that he tried to catch her, but was too late. When he reached her, she was unresponsive. He attempted to provide aid, but it was no use. Brenda had suffered a fatal neck injury from the fall. In a panic, Naeem realized that he could be blamed for what had happened. Fear took over, and he made a desperate decision to dispose of the evidence. He saw no other option but to attempt to destroy the remains using a large outdoor grill on the terrace. He found lighter fluid in a cabinet, poured it over Brenda, and struck a match. The fire ignited instantly, but the flames grew too high, and the thick smoke became overwhelming. It was at that moment that he realized the situation was spiraling out of control. A man from a neighboring apartment peeked outside, surprised to see someone grilling meat in the middle of the night. However, when Naeem noticed him, he casually greeted him with a wave and a friendly smile. Later, in court, this neighbor testified that Naeem appeared completely calm, if not content. Seeing nothing suspicious, he didn't think to call the authorities. It wasn't long before Naeem realized that a grill was not a crematorium, and that his plan wasn't working. Realizing he wouldn't be able to get rid of the remains completely, he carried them back inside. Using a large knife, he separated the lower half of the body from the upper half. He then packed everything into garbage bags, placed them in boxes, and loaded them into his car, still unsure of how to dispose of them. Driving aimlessly, he made a split-second decision. He discarded the lower half in a random dumpster he passed along the way. As for the upper half, he drove out of the city, stopping near a shallow ravine just a short distance from the road. He tossed the remains into the ditch and covered them with dirt, branches, and trash. As he was walking back to his car, a passing patrol unit nearly caught him. Officers stopped to check why his vehicle was parked on the side of the road. Thinking quickly, Naim fabricated a story. He claimed his girlfriend had just called him, and he had pulled over to talk. The officers believed him and left without further questioning. After returning to his apartment, Naim attempted to clean up the mess, but quickly realized the task was too overwhelming for him to handle alone. He decided to call his cousin. Over the phone, he admitted to everything. At first, his cousin thought Naim was hallucinating or under the influence of prohibited substances, but after thinking it over, he made a call to Naim's father. From that moment on, the situation was no longer in Naim's hands. His father, after consulting with attorneys, forced his son to turn himself in, hoping this would help reduce his sentence. During his confession, Naim provided the locations where he had disposed of the remains. In addition, surveillance footage from a nearby building captured him tossing bags into a dumpster, along with his car in the background. Even if he had tried to change his story, the evidence was undeniable. Investigators quickly located the second box in the ravine, and forensic experts were immediately called in to examine the remains. However, their findings revealed a shocking truth, one that completely contradicted Naim's version of events. Despite the body being severely burned and later dismembered, there were no injuries consistent with a fall down the stairs. There were no broken bones, no severe bruising, and most significantly, the victim's neck was fully intact. Instead, the autopsy revealed a far more disturbing cause of death. The cartilage in Brenda's throat had been crushed, not by accident, but by force. The pressure had been applied with bare hands. The official cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. Brenda had been strangled. But that wasn't all. Forensic experts found fabric fibers inside Brenda's mouth, later identified as material from her own scarf. This meant that before she was strangled, something had been forced into her mouth to silence her. Additionally, fresh scratches were visible on Naim's hands, indicating that Brenda had fought back desperately. The evidence painted a grim picture. This was not an accident, but a deliberate act of cruelty. As soon as Brenda's family and friends learned of the tragedy, a new detail surfaced. Her alleged pregnancy, something Naim had chosen not to mention. When questioned about it by investigators, he admitted that Brenda had been pressuring him for weeks, using the pregnancy to manipulate him. According to Naim, their relationship was strictly physical and never romantic. He claimed that there had never been any discussion of a future together, let alone starting a family. When Brenda told him she was expecting, he immediately offered to cover the cost of terminating the pregnancy, but she refused. This disagreement had led to heated arguments, and on the night of the incident, Brenda had allegedly not only insisted on keeping the baby, but also demanded that Naim marry her. He said this made him furious, and in his anger, he ended her life. However, there was a major flaw in his story. An autopsy revealed that Brenda had not been pregnant at all. If she had been using this as leverage against Naim, it was an empty threat. But investigators dug even deeper and uncovered a surprising truth. Brenda had been diagnosed with a medical condition that made pregnancy impossible. She had known this since she was a teenager. So why had she told Naim otherwise? Virginia, one of Brenda's closest friends, later provided insight during questioning. She explained that Brenda had genuinely believed she was expecting. She had missed her cycle, experienced symptoms, and was overjoyed, thinking that doctors had been wrong about her condition. When she shared the news with Naim, instead of reacting with excitement or support, he immediately dismissed her and cut ties. Brenda confided in only 2 of her closest friends about the pregnancy. She never had the chance to see a doctor to confirm it and never mentioned it to her mother. According to Virginia, Brenda had no intention of deceiving or manipulating Naim. She had truly believed she was going to be a mother and had started imagining a future with him. Naim was arrested the same day. He turned himself in and gave his version of events. However, he insisted that what happened was an accident. He claimed that he had been in shock, which was why he hadn't called for help and instead made the horrific decision to dispose of Brenda in such a brutal manner. Most notably, he continued to assert that there had never been a real relationship between them, only a casual arrangement with no commitments. Under Argentine law, crimes committed within the context of a romantic or domestic relationship are classified as aggravated offenses. This is because the victim is considered to be in a vulnerable position. They trust their partner, do not perceive them as a threat, and may have a diminished sense of self-preservation. If the court determined that Brenda and Naim were in a relationship, he would be facing a severe sentence, potentially life in prison. However, if he could convince the judges that their interactions were purely casual and had no emotional ties, his sentence could be reduced to maximum of 15 years. This was the key argument for Naim and the legal team hired by his father. They aggressively worked to prove that there was no real relationship between him and Brenda. They emphasized that the two were never seen together in public, had no shared photos, and had not introduced each other to their families or friends. However, Brenda's loved ones painted a very different picture. Her friends and family insisted that she was deeply in love with Naim and truly believed their feelings were mutual. She didn't want to pressure him, so she never pushed for a formal introduction to his parents, assuming he just needed more time. One of Naim's classmates later revealed that Naim had never taken Brenda seriously. He simply enjoyed spending time with her, but had been stringing her along, giving her false hope. When she told him about the pregnancy, he reportedly panicked and became desperate to find a way out. According to the classmate, Naim once said that either the baby wouldn't be born or he would take his own life. At the time, no one thought much of his words. But just a week before the crime, Naim allegedly approached his cousin, asking if he knew someone who would be willing to take care of a problem for money. His cousin dismissed it as nonsense, assuming Naim was just venting. It wasn't until that fateful night, when Naim called him, asking for help covering up the crime, that he realized how serious the situation truly was. After the incident, Naim's family publicly expressed their condolences to Brenda's loved ones, stating that this tragedy had destroyed their lives as well. However, his legal team continued to fight for his defense, attempting to minimize his responsibility. They tried to paint Brenda as someone who had been manipulating and pressuring Naim, claiming she had faked the pregnancy to force him into marriage. According to their argument, she had ulterior motives and saw him as a wealthy and promising husband. Naim himself attempted to claim he had acted in a moment of extreme distress, but this defense quickly fell apart. During his initial interrogation, he provided detailed descriptions of how he disposed of Brenda's remains, something unlikely for someone who was supposedly in shock. Moreover, the testimony of his neighbor was damning. The witness recalled seeing Naim grilling on the terrace that night, noting that he appeared completely calm. He even greeted the neighbor with a friendly wave, as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. The psychiatric evaluation determined that at the time of the crime, the perpetrator was fully aware of his actions and could be held legally responsible. However, specialists also diagnosed Naim with psychopathic traits, borderline personality disorder, and bipolar affective disorder. Despite these findings, none of them reduced his legal culpability. The Vera family had money and influential connections, which could have helped Naim escape full accountability. His legal team deliberately delayed the trial, hoping that public attention would eventually fade. Brenda's family feared that Naim might receive a lenient sentence, or worse, evade justice altogether. Brenda's mother, Florencia, refused to accept this possibility and decided to take matters into her own hands. She organized multiple protests and marches, demanding that the perpetrator be held accountable. Feminist activists also joined the movement, determined to ensure the case was not swept under the rug. The trial finally began in May 2021 and received widespread media coverage. A crucial aspect of the proceedings was defining the nature of the relationship between Naim and Brenda. His defense attorneys, emphasizing his young age, argued that he had not been ready for a serious commitment and that his connection with Brenda was merely a casual fling. If they succeeded in convincing the court, Naim could have received a minimal sentence. Furthermore, if they could establish that the crime had not been premeditated, he might have been eligible for parole within 5 to 7 years. Throughout the trial, the defendant remained cold and detached. He showed no remorse for his actions. Nevertheless, following his attorney's advice, he offered a formal apology to Brenda's family, but it sounded insincere, almost mocking. On May 14, 2021, Naim was found guilty of aggravated homicide and attempting to cover up the crime. He was sentenced to life in prison without the of parole. Additionally, he was ordered to pay Brenda's family 3 million pesos in moral damages. The defendant refused to make a final statement and listened to the verdict with an emotionless expression, as if it did not concern him. However, immediately after the sentencing, his attorneys announced their intention to appeal. As the defense team prepared to challenge the ruling, searching for new witnesses and evidence to support Naim's innocence, the press began uncovering past incidents that his parents had managed to suppress. 2 former classmates came forward, accusing Naim of harassment and aggressive behavior. Both women agreed to testify in court, stating that Naim was a serious threat. They described how he had never been accustomed to rejection. Girls had always flocked to him. However, when one of his classmates refused his advances, he began stalking her, threatening her, and attempting to humiliate her in every possible way. Another young woman had to transfer schools after Naim attempted to force himself on her. When she resisted, he retaliated by spreading malicious rumors and leaking private photos of her online. His father's legal team had managed to cover up both scandals at the time. In March 2022, the court held a retrial for Brenda Gordillo's case. Taking the new testimonies into account, the court upheld the original sentence. Naim was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 51 years. Case 4. The concept of crime is often tied to a specific motive. Exceptions might include acts committed by individuals with mental health issues, those under the influence of alcohol or controlled substances, or incidents occurring in moments of extreme emotional disturbance. However, even though the term motiveless crime exists, criminologists argue that most of these cases involve hidden motives that remain undiscovered. The disappearance of college student Emily Murray in 2000 shook the entire state of Ohio. Weeks later, Emily was found dead, and the person responsible for her tragic end had been hiding in plain sight, assisting law enforcement with the investigation and even offering tips to implicate others. When authorities finally arrested him, they faced a perplexing challenge. There seemed to be no discernible motive. Various theories were proposed to explain what drove him to commit such an act, but none were substantiated. To make matters more baffling, the suspect appeared to have a fondness for Emily and even seemed to protect her, but at some point something shifted, turning him into a predator. Despite nearly a quarter of a century passing since the incident, the perpetrator has never revealed why he took the life of a defenseless young woman. Who is Emily Murray? Emily Miranda Murray was born on February 19, 1980, in the small town of Sleepy Hollow, Westchester County, New York. She was the youngest of 4 siblings in a well-off family. Emily grew up alongside her 2 older brothers and 1 sister, maintaining a close bond with them throughout her life. When Emily was 2, her family relocated to Ohio, settling in Shaker Heights, Cuyahoga County. Her father had been offered a prestigious position at a scientific university and soon became the head of one of its departments. Her mother dedicated herself to raising the children and creating a warm home environment, as the family's financial security allowed them to live comfortably. The Murray children excelled academically, graduating from high school with honors and going on to attend top-tier universities. Emily, in particular, was passionate about biology and medicine, envisioning a future in the field. She was recognized as a gifted student and often ranked at the top of her class. Remarkably, Emily also managed to hold part-time jobs while donating her earnings to charitable causes. Emily's upbringing was deeply influenced by her parents' devout Christian faith. The family attended church regularly and Emily followed their example, always eager to help those in need with both words and actions. After graduating high school, she dedicated a year to traveling the world with various humanitarian organizations. This journey took her to New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and several European countries. In 1998, Emily Murray began her studies at Kenyon College in Gambia, Ohio, moving into the campus dorms. Those who knew her described her as someone brimming with life and energy, spreading positivity to everyone around her. Emily was kind, empathetic, approachable, and incredibly driven. At the same time, she had a sensitive side, often showing vulnerability and moments of melancholy. She kept a personal journal where she recorded her innermost thoughts, dreams, and fears. Missing after a night shift, by 2000, Emily had advanced to her junior year in college. Alongside her demanding academic schedule, she remained deeply involved in church-based charitable work and took on evening shifts as a waitress at a local restaurant. Her workload was immense, yet she seemed to handle it all with grace. She even found time to enjoy her personal life, attending social gatherings that she cherished. However, it would soon become clear that not everything in her life was as seamless as it appeared. On the morning of Tuesday, November 3rd, 2000, Emily's two dorm roommates woke up to find her bed empty. They were puzzled. Emily was always considerate and let them know if she planned to stay elsewhere overnight. Her restaurant shift had been scheduled to end at 2 a.m., so they assumed she might have stayed late at work or gone straight to class. But when they noticed that her textbooks and notes were still on her shelf, things began to feel unusual. The roommates went about their morning, heading to their lectures while asking friends if anyone had seen Emily. It turned out no one had seen her since the previous day, and she hadn't shown up for any of her classes. While her absence was unsettling, her friends initially tried to rationalize the situation, hoping there was a reasonable explanation. That evening, a party was planned to celebrate a close friend's 20th birthday, an event Emily had been looking forward to for weeks. She had carefully chosen a gift and had even helped organize a surprise for the birthday celebrant. Missing the party was unthinkable for Emily, yet when she didn't show up, her friends grew increasingly alarmed. Desperate for answers, they reached out to Emily's family, thinking she might have returned home due to an emergency. Her parents were shocked and distraught upon hearing she had vanished. That same night, they drove to Gambia to join the search, determined to find out what had happened to their daughter. By morning, the Murrays, along with their older children, had arrived at the campus, frantically trying to figure out what could have happened to their youngest daughter. By that time, word of Emily's disappearance had spread throughout the college community. Multiple groups of volunteers, friends, and classmates were searching for her, but there were no signs. She seemed to have vanished without a trace. It was soon discovered that Emily's car, a dark green Subaru Outback gifted by her father for her 20th birthday, was also missing. The Murrays' first move was to contact campus security, reporting that one of the students was missing and requesting help organizing a search effort. However, their concerns were met with indifference. Security staff dismissed their worries, suggesting that Emily was likely spending time alone with a boyfriend and would return soon. Despite the family's insistence that Emily would never leave without notifying someone, they were advised to wait a little longer. More than 24 hours had passed since Emily had last been seen, and her family was growing increasingly desperate. Realizing campus security would be of no help, they filed a missing person report with the local police. To their shock, law enforcement initially seemed to downplay the situation as well, speculating that Emily might have gone off on her own or decided to take an unannounced break. After all, they reasoned she was a 20-year-old college student who didn't need to account for her every move. Still, the police eventually agreed to inspect Emily's dorm room. That's when they discovered she had left behind her ID, bank cards, and personal belongings. She had been last seen wearing her work uniform from her restaurant shift, which suggested she hadn't changed clothes since leaving her job. This raised serious doubts about the idea that she had gone off to spend time with a boyfriend or taken an impromptu break. It seemed highly unlikely that Emily would leave without money or essential items. Her last day at work, Emily was officially declared a missing person on the, and concerned members of the community were already conducting their own searches, distributing flyers with her photo around town and combing the surrounding areas. The investigation began at the restaurant where Emily had last been seen. Located just across the street from the campus, the restaurant, called the Pirates Cove, was a popular hangout for students thanks to its convenient location and affordable menu. It quickly came to light that Emily's shift that night was her last. She had quit her job that evening. Overwhelmed by her rigorous schedule, she had decided to cut back on her responsibilities. Between her demanding coursework, volunteer work at the church, and part-time evening shifts, she had been struggling to manage everything. Her packed schedule had also taken a toll on her personal life. Just a month earlier, she had ended her relationship with her boyfriend, Adam, because they rarely had time to see each other. That evening, many of Emily's friends stopped by the Pirates Cove to support her on her last day at work. However, no one stayed too late since they had classes the next morning. Her shift officially ended at 2 a.m., but Emily stayed an additional 30 minutes to finish up some tasks. This meant her coworkers were the last to see her, and it was their accounts that the police would rely on to piece together the night's events. Emily wasn't alone during those final moments at the restaurant. Her friend Olivia, who also worked as a waitress, and a bartender named David Kale, were there with her, helping to close up. Together they cleaned up the dining area and finished around 2:45 a.m. Shortly afterward, everyone began heading home. This was corroborated by Gregory McKnight, a 24-year-old cook, who was the last to leave and locked up the restaurant at 3:15 a.m. None of her coworkers noticed anything unusual. Emily behaved like her normal self, kind, cheerful, and polite. She didn't mention any plans for the rest of the night and told them she was simply heading back to her dorm to get some sleep before her morning classes. A troubled spirit beneath the smile. When investigators searched Emily's dorm room, they found her personal journal, which contained troubling entries. Despite her upbeat and friendly demeanor, Emily had been battling a prolonged period of depression, something she had kept private and tried to manage on her own. Known for being sensitive and empathetic, Emily often internalized the pain and suffering of others, a quality that made her deeply compassionate but also emotionally vulnerable. Through her charitable work, Emily was regularly exposed to the harsh realities of life, including stories of injustice and cruelty. She poured her energy into helping those in need, but it frustrated her to feel powerless against the larger forces of the world. In her journal, she wrote about how overwhelming these emotions could be and how difficult it was for her to cope with the weight of her empathy. While the journal contained no direct references to plans of self-harm or taking drastic measures, detectives could not entirely rule out the possibility that Emily might have decided to step away from her life. This theory deeply upset Emily's family and close friends. They strongly refuted the idea, insisting that Emily's faith was a central part of her life and that she would never consider such an act. She was a deeply religious person, and her belief system regarded such actions as an unforgivable sin. Furthermore, Emily had ambitious plans for her future, which she had outlined in her journal. In one entry, she sketched a picture of her dream life. A large home, herself, her future husband, their 5 children, and a dozen dogs. She aspired to build a life centered around love, family, and community, a goal that seemed to motivate her every day. Since Emily had disappeared along with her car, investigators initially considered the possibility of her running away. They theorized that, in light of her struggles with depression, she might have decided to leave town to reflect on her life. Her recent breakup with her boyfriend and resignation from her job could have exacerbated her emotional challenges, making this a plausible explanation for her disappearance. The first person investigators turned their attention to was Emily's ex-boyfriend Adam, a logical starting point in cases like this. Their relationship had lasted about a year and a half, but had been tumultuous, with multiple breakups and reconciliations. This time, however, Emily had decided to end things for good, and had made it clear to Adam during what appeared to be a calm and amicable conversation. They agreed to remain friends, but investigators couldn't help but wonder, what if Adam hadn't been able to let her go? Adam willingly came to the police station when contacted. He appeared genuinely distressed, and seemed to deeply care about Emily's well-being. He explained that, on the night of Emily's disappearance, he and his roommate had stopped by the Pirates' Cove, but left around midnight. They returned to their dorm, where other students confirmed seeing them. Adam and his roommate reportedly stayed in for the rest of the night, a claim corroborated by 2 other dorm mates. With a solid alibi and no evidence to suggest involvement, Adam was quickly ruled out as a suspect. A workplace romance. Investigators then turned their focus to Emily's coworkers. During their inquiries, a cook at the Pirates' Cove shared a surprising piece of information. The bartender, David Cale, was said to have had romantic feelings for Emily, which she had not reciprocated. On the night of Emily's disappearance, Cale and Emily worked the same shift, stayed late to close up, and left the restaurant just 10 minutes apart. Could Cale have waited for her outside and done something to harm her after she rejected him? David was brought in for a second round of questioning. He admitted that he had once asked Emily out, but after she turned him down, he had never pursued the topic again. He maintained that they had a friendly, professional relationship and nothing more. Furthermore, David provided what detectives deemed a rock-solid alibi. After his shift, his father picked him up from the restaurant, and they immediately drove to another state to attend his sister's wedding. The alibi was verified, leaving investigators with no evidence to link him to Emily's disappearance. Once the bartender was ruled out as a suspect, detectives received a new lead from the same cook, Greg McKnight. He hinted that another cook, Dave Yoakum, also had an unusual interest in Emily. Dave was known to struggle with interactions with women. He was awkward, rude, and prone to losing his temper when rejected. Other waitresses confirmed this behavior, sharing that Dave had made clumsy advances toward them as well. When his attempts were rebuffed, he often responded with sharp remarks and displayed a generally disrespectful attitude. Furthermore, just 4 days after Emily's disappearance, Joachim was fired from the restaurant following a heated argument, which investigators found highly suspicious. On the night Emily vanished, Joachim was off work and had not been seen at the restaurant. However, detectives needed to interview him and verify his whereabouts. When questioned, Dave expressed genuine surprise at being considered a suspect in the case. He provided a solid alibi, explaining that he had attended a concert by a well-known rock band in a nearby city that night, accompanied by friends who confirmed his story. A dead end. With every suspect cleared and no new evidence emerging, the investigation ground to a halt. Emily's family and friends held on to hope, praying she would return home safely. However, experienced detectives feared the worst, suspecting she was no longer alive. An unexpected twist. Let's rewind to about a month before Emily's disappearance, to an event that initially seemed unrelated to her case. On October 1st, 2000, a minor car accident occurred on the outskirts of Harrison, a small town in Vinton County, Ohio. A man named Ronaldo Hopkins was driving home when an old Buick swerved into his lane, causing a collision. Hopkins got out of his car to assess the damage and noticed a firearm inside the other vehicle's trunk, which had popped open from the impact. Alarmed, he immediately called the police to report the incident. Although the other driver was fined for the accident and the gun was confiscated, authorities allowed him to leave. More than 2 months later, on December 9, 2000, that same driver was charged with involvement in a theft. According to the case documents, he resided in a remote trailer park, so 2 officers were dispatched to deliver a court summons requiring his appearance for questioning. When officers arrived at the trailer, they found it in an isolated area, far removed from the other residences in the park. The property appeared abandoned, with 2 rusted, damaged vehicles parked out front that seemed unlikely to ever run again. However, behind the trailer, the officers discovered something that didn't match the scene, a dark green Subaru Outback. After running the vehicle's plates through their database, they confirmed it was Emily Murray's car, listed as missing along with its owner. Information about the discovery of Emily's car was immediately relayed to the Gambia division investigating her case, along with the name of the person living at the property where the vehicle was found. That individual was Gregory McKnight, the same cook from the restaurant where Emily had worked. McKnight had previously attempted to shift suspicion onto his coworkers, managing to avoid close scrutiny himself. A search warrant for McKnight's trailer was secured in record time, and a police team was dispatched to the location. The door lock was broken, and 2 officers entered to begin their search. Almost immediately, they were overwhelmed by the sickening smell of decomposition. Following the odor to the back of the trailer, they found its source, a young woman's body wrapped in a carpet. From the start, there was little doubt that the remains belonged to Emily, and forensic testing soon confirmed it. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. The bullet had been fired at close range, with the weapon pressed against the right side of her skull. Spent shell casings and a significant amount of blood were found at the scene, indicating that the crime had been committed inside the trailer. Detectives now turned their attention to arresting and questioning their primary suspect, McKnight, in custody. Gregory McKnight was taken into custody later that day, initially on charges unrelated to Emily's death, specifically his alleged involvement in an armed robbery. However, when he was informed about the discovery in his trailer, he went silent, refusing to answer questions and immediately requesting a lawyer. While there was no direct evidence linking him to Emily's death at that moment, police held him in custody pending further investigation. The body and the well neighbors at the trailer park told investigators they had not seen or heard anything unusual. This wasn't surprising given that McKnight's trailer was located far from the other homes. The property itself was in a state of disrepair, littered with trash and surrounded by rusted, dilapidated vehicles. Detectives conducted a thorough search of the area, hoping to uncover additional evidence. It didn't take long for them to stumble upon a small, overgrown well, hidden under a sheet of metal weighed down by a fallen tree. The well was drained, and at the bottom, investigators discovered a human skeleton, which appeared to belong to a male. Nearby, several additional bone fragments were found scattered across the property. Forensic analysis confirmed that all the remains belonged to a single individual whose identity was still unknown. However, police soon connected the discovery to a missing person case from 6 months earlier. A 20-year-old student named Glenn Julius, a friend of McKnight, had vanished without a trace. Glenn's girlfriend had reported that the last time she saw him, he had been planning to attend a party with McKnight. When the search for Glenn Julius began, Gregory McKnight quickly became the primary suspect. However, McKnight claimed that he and Glenn had an argument at the gathering, and Glenn left with some new acquaintances in his car. After that, no one saw him again. Investigators found no evidence to support McKnight's story, but they also lacked concrete proof to implicate him in the disappearance, so he was released. Glenn's girlfriend later identified fragments of his clothing and belts recovered from the well. His family provided dental records, which confirmed that the remains belonged to Glenn. Additionally, several of his personal items were discovered inside McKnight's trailer. Further investigation revealed that McKnight had illegally sold Glenn's car shortly after his disappearance. The vehicle was sold to associates, who were also implicated in an armed robbery case. The car had been hastily repainted, and its license plates replaced with fake ones. After one of McKnight's accomplices was arrested, authorities located the car. In the trunk, they found significant traces of cleaned-up blood that, upon forensic testing, were confirmed to belong to Glenn. This suggested that Glenn, either wounded or already deceased, had been transported in the trunk. Glenn's body had been partially dismembered, and the work had been done crudely, likely using makeshift tools. Deep scratches on the bones resembled marks left by a saw. Inside McKnight's trailer, investigators found a shovel, an axe, and several other tools, all of which were taken for forensic examination. It was conclusively determined that the axe had been used during the dismemberment, though other tools left unidentifiable marks. Who is Gregory McKnight? Gregory McKnight was born on November 12, 1976, in an underprivileged suburb of Columbus, Ohio. He grew up without a father, in a large, struggling family where everyone had to fend for themselves. McKnight started stealing as a young boy, first catching the attention of law enforcement at age 14. By the time he was 15, he had committed his first fatal crime during a botched robbery. Because McKnight had accomplices who were older, the jury showed leniency towards him, and he received a relatively light sentence. He was sentenced to just 6 years and was sent to a juvenile detention facility. In 1997, he was released and soon married a woman named Catherine, who later gave birth to 2 children. The couple lived with Catherine's parents for a while until McKnight saved enough money to buy his trailer. However, the move to their new residence never happened. In May 2000, Gregory McKnight committed the crime of killing Glenn Julius, hiding his remains in the well behind his trailer. Then, in November of that same year, he kidnapped and killed Emily Murray, leaving her body to decompose inside the trailer. Catherine's suspicion during questioning, McKnight's wife Catherine admitted that she had grown suspicious about the trailer. Her husband frequently went there alone and refused to let her visit, or even approach the property. She assumed he was using the space to meet lovers or to harbor his criminal associates, who might have been hiding from the law. She had considered many possibilities, but the idea that he was storing human remains there never crossed her mind. Trial and sentence, although the evidence against McKnight was extensive, most of it was circumstantial. Authorities were unable to determine exactly how and where Julius had been killed. As a result, the prosecution could not seek the death penalty for that particular crime. Emily's case seemed more straightforward. Her body was found at the scene, with clear traces linking both her and McKnight to the trailer. However, the murder weapon was never recovered, and there was no apparent motive for such a cruel act. Emily had not been subjected to any form of assault, was not robbed, and even her car was abandoned behind the trailer. The question remained, why would McKnight commit such a horrific crime against a young college student? Numerous coworkers testified that McKnight had always behaved respectfully toward Emily. He was described as polite and, on one occasion, had even stepped in to protect her from an intoxicated customer who had acted inappropriately toward her. McKnight himself refused to cooperate with investigators. He denied all charges and provided no details about either crime. The prosecution argued that after Emily's restaurant shift, McKnight had lured her into a trap. He might have asked her for help, knowing she was kind and trusting, and Emily, unaware of the danger, couldn't refuse. Once inside the trailer, he may have expressed romantic feelings for her, but when she turned him down, he flew into a rage and committed the crime. The defense attempted to argue that McKnight was mentally unfit, but a psychiatric evaluation concluded that he was fully aware of his actions and could be held responsible. Switching tactics, McKnight's attorneys tried to paint Emily as a deeply depressed individual with self-destructive tendencies, claiming McKnight merely assisted her in fulfilling a supposed wish to die. This argument was met with outrage from Emily's loved ones and failed to sway the court. The verdict in 2002, Gregory McKnight was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and involvement in armed robbery. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection and sent to death row to await execution. All appeals and requests for clemency were denied. In 2015, Gregory McKnight requested that his sentence be carried out, stating that he would rather die than rot in prison while waiting for execution. However, he soon changed his mind and attempted to appeal the sentence once again, but his efforts were unsuccessful. In 2020, McKnight filed a legal complaint, alleging racism and unfair treatment during his trial. He claimed that both the judge and the jury members were white and had shown bias against him, resulting in what he argued was an excessively harsh punishment. As of today, Gregory McKnight remains on death row, awaiting execution. Case 5. Appearances can often be dangerously deceptive. People who seem charming, kind, and approachable may, in reality, harbor dark intentions and pose significant dangers. This is why it's crucial to be cautious and never place blind trust in anyone. History is filled with cases where seemingly charismatic individuals committed shocking acts of cruelty after earning the trust of their victims. Some of the most infamous examples include well-known figures like Ted Bundy or Rodney Alcala, whose good looks and charismatic personas mask their true nature. One particularly chilling case that shook the world occurred in the fall of 2020, involving the tragic deaths of renowned soccer referee Daniele De Santis and his fiancée Eleonora Manta. The crime was horrifying in its brutality and baffling in its apparent lack of motive. As investigators delved into the case, the revelation of the perpetrator's identity stunned everyone. Beneath an angelic exterior was someone capable of unthinkable cruelty. Even more disturbing, the criminal expressed an intention to repeat their actions, fueled by a chilling enjoyment of causing harm. This shocking story left a mark not only for its senseless nature, but also for the cold calculation and future intent behind it. It serves as a sobering reminder that outward appearances can never fully reveal the true character of a person. Daniele De Santis was born in 1987 in the Italian city of Lecce. He was the eldest of 3 siblings in a close-knit and relatively affluent family. Growing up alongside his 2 younger sisters, Daniele formed strong, trusting relationships with them from an early age. Sports played a significant role in Daniele's life from the start, with soccer becoming his greatest passion. After finishing high school, he enrolled in a prestigious Italian university, where he pursued a degree in law, graduating in 2009. Alongside his studies, Daniele began building a successful career as a soccer referee. Starting as an assistant referee in 2017, he made his debut as the 4th official in a match between Pisa and Benevento. Over the years, his hard work and dedication earned him opportunities to officiate in Serie C and Serie B matches, overseeing more than 130 games in total. Daniele was known for his charismatic personality, athletic build, and recognizable presence on the soccer field. His career brought him financial success and the promise of a bright future. He had big plans for his life and was determined to continue growing in his profession. Daniele's talents extended beyond his professional life. His personal life was equally fulfilling, as he was in a loving relationship with Eleonora Manta, a charming young woman 3 years his junior. The couple planned to marry in the near future. Eleonora was born in Milan in 1990 and grew up in a modest household. She was the youngest of 3 siblings with 2 older twin brothers. During her early school years, her parents divorced. Her father eventually remarried and became largely absent from his children's lives, leaving her mother to shoulder the responsibility of raising them. From a young age, Eleonora pursued sports and dance with dedication. These shared interests brought her and Daniele together in 2019, and their instant connection blossomed into a romantic relationship. Friends and family described them as a beautiful, harmonious couple, seemingly perfect for each other. According to those close to them, the pair never argued and had absolute trust in one another. Eleonora had long dreamed of earning a degree in law. In 2020, she won a competitive placement to study at a university program specializing in law and international relations. Thrilled by the opportunity, she eagerly dove into her studies that September. By the summer of 2020, the couple decided to move in together, choosing Danielle's spacious apartment in a modern and prestigious residential complex. At the time, Daniele had been renting one of the rooms to a medical student who needed some time to find alternate housing. The transition went smoothly, and Eleonora gradually began moving her belongings into her boyfriend's home. In September 2020, life seemed to be falling into place for Daniele DeSantis and Eleonora Manta. Danielle's former tenant had moved out, Eleonora had brought over her belongings, and the couple was on the verge of living together permanently. They were also busy planning what was meant to be the happiest day of their lives, their wedding. Daniele was set to officiate an Italian Cup match between Monopoly and Medina on September 23rd, but tragically, he would not live to see that day. On the evening of September 21st, the couple was celebrating Eleonora's move with a quiet romantic dinner in Danielle's apartment. Around 9:45 p.m., the peaceful evening was shattered when a chilling scream for help and sounds of a struggle filled the air. Neighbors, alarmed by the commotion, heard the unsettling noise persist for nearly 10 minutes. In that time, nearly a dozen calls were made to local emergency services, with many reporting that it sounded like someone was being attacked. None of them realized just how horrifyingly accurate their observations were. Shortly after 10 p.m., a 12-year-old boy walking his dog across the street from the building witnessed something that would haunt him. He heard the cries, but didn't fully grasp what was happening until a young man ran out of the apartment complex. The man hesitated briefly before heading toward the boy. The child later recalled the man's cold, emotionless expression and the knife in his hand. Terrified, the boy froze, unsure of what would happen next. Thankfully, passers-by appeared nearby, causing the man to flee. Despite his attempts to hide his face, several people got a good look at him before he disappeared into the night. Moments later, police cars and ambulances arrived at the scene. However, there was nothing they could do to save Daniele or Eleonora. Daniele was found lying on his back in the stairwell, surrounded by a large pool of blood, unresponsive. The door to the apartment was wide open, and inside, Eleonora's body was discovered in the hallway face down. Her clothes and hair were soaked in blood. Both had passed away before emergency services arrived. The cause of death was later determined to be multiple stab wounds and massive blood loss. Forensic examiners counted 38 stab wounds on Danielle's body and 37 on Eleonora's. The extreme level of violence raised chilling questions. Who could carry out such a brutal attack, and why would they target this young, loving couple? Investigators initially considered the possibility of a botched robbery. Daniele was a well-known public figure, and it was no secret that he was financially successful. It seemed plausible that someone acting on a tip had broken in expecting to find valuables, only to be confronted by the couple at home. The timing, however, appeared to be tragically unlucky for Daniele and Eleonora. This theory was quickly dismissed, as nothing of value was missing from the apartment. Cash was left in plain sight, untouched. Moreover, Eleonora was wearing an expensive set of jewelry gifted to her by Daniele during their engagement. A pair of earrings, a necklace, and a diamond ring. None of these items were taken. Investigators were immediately struck by the extreme brutality of the attack. The victims were savagely attacked with a knife, which indicated personal motives and a deep-seated hatred toward them. This led to speculation that the crime might have been fueled by passion, perhaps a scorned lover, or someone seeking revenge. Detectives considered the possibility of a love triangle, where one of the victims might have had an affair that culminated in this violent act. However, this theory was soon ruled out. Daniele and Eleonora were deeply in love, and everyone who knew them was adamant that neither of them would betray the other. Nevertheless, the possibility of someone harboring unrequited feelings for one of them couldn't be ruled out entirely. At the crime scene, several peculiar items were found that didn't seem to belong to the victims. These included zip ties, a couple of bottles of bleach, and a blood-stained stocking. These objects were scattered across the room, suggesting they were brought by the perpetrator. Later forensic analysis revealed that the stocking contained traces of Danielle's blood and the DNA of an unknown man. It appeared that the attacker had used the stocking as a mask to hide his face, but during the struggle, Daniele likely pulled it off. The stocking also bore a disturbing detail, a sad face drawn in black marker. Eyewitnesses provided enough information to create a composite sketch of the perpetrator. The clearest account came from the boy walking his dog, who had come face to face with the assailant. However, the child was understandably frightened, and given that it was late at night, there were concerns about the accuracy of his description. The boy provided a more detailed account of the man's clothing and the backpack he was carrying, though the composite sketch didn't immediately lead to a breakthrough in the investigation. As detectives interviewed witnesses, some recalled hearing Eleonora repeatedly pleading with someone to stop, even shouting a name that sounded like Andrea several times. This was the first significant lead. Investigators began meticulously looking into every man named Andrea connected to the couple's lives, hoping it might lead them to the truth. The first person under suspicion was a man named Andrea Formati, an acquaintance of Eleonora's from her teenage years. Though they lived in different cities and rarely interacted, they followed each other on social media. Investigators speculated that Formati might have harbored feelings for Eleonora since their youth. Learning of her engagement, he may have acted on the twisted idea of, "If I can't have you, no one can," targeting both her and her fiancé. Andrea was quickly located and brought in for questioning. Shocked by the news of Eleonora's death, he was even more stunned to find himself a suspect. However, his name was soon cleared. On the night of the crime, Andrea was on a business trip in Rome, with an alibi corroborated by numerous witnesses and security camera footage. The next suspect was Andrea Martinelli, a longtime friend of Daniele. Investigators considered the possibility that he secretly had feelings for Eleonora and resented Daniele because of it. Phone records revealed that the two men had spoken just 3 hours before the crime occurred. However, Martinelli also had an ironclad alibi, verified by multiple individuals. After ruling out the close friends, detectives turned their attention to a 37-year-old man named Andrea Rodio, a more recent acquaintance of the couple. He bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch, making him a prime suspect. Rodio was detained and witnesses were called in to identify him. Yet, every witness unanimously stated that the man they saw the night of the crime was someone else. Adding to his defense, Rodio too had a solid alibi, and he was released. With no other suspicious individuals named Andrea in the couple's social circle, the investigation hit a dead end. Detectives began to question whether Eleonora had shouted a different name during the attack, which meant the time spent investigating men named Andrea might have been wasted. It was now imperative to find new leads to move the case forward. During a second search of the crime scene, police uncovered a critical piece of evidence that had been overlooked earlier. Beneath a small shoe rack, they found a folded piece of paper, likely dropped by the perpetrator. The paper appeared to have been torn from a notebook, similar to those used by students. Written on it, in hasty handwriting, was a detailed series of steps, a chilling plan of action for entering the apartment and carrying out the crime. The instructions explicitly included subduing the couple using the zip ties that had been found at the scene. It appeared that the attacker had meticulously planned to restrain and harm the victims using the materials they had brought with them. This discovery shed new light on the calculated nature of the crime and reignited the investigation with a renewed focus on identifying the cold and methodical perpetrator. For reasons unknown, the perpetrator abandoned the most brutal parts of their plan. Most likely, this was due to the fierce resistance put up by the couple. The loud screams and commotion, overheard by numerous neighbors, also likely made the attacker fear being caught in the act. The note revealed that the assailant had spent some time observing the apartment, walking near the windows and listening at the door to ensure that the couple was alone and had no guests. Other items on the list included disguising themselves with a nylon stocking, changing into clean clothes after the crime, and using bleach to erase evidence. However, the note offered no hint of a motive for such a horrifying crime. At the bottom of the page, there was a hand-drawn map of the neighborhood where the victims lived. The map marked all the outdoor surveillance cameras on buildings and utility poles, along with several escape routes that avoided these cameras. Despite this apparent planning, the attacker ignored these precautions during the escape. Witnesses pointed out the direction the suspect fled, and investigators were able to partially track the route using surveillance footage. Yet, the trail yielded little immediate progress. The composite sketch of the perpetrator had been circulating on television and in newspapers for several days, but no solid leads emerged. Then, on September 26th, a young man walked into a police station and reported that the sketch strongly resembled his classmate, a 21-year-old medical student named Antonio DeMarco. What caught the investigators' attention was that Antonio had not attended classes or contacted anyone at the university for several days following the crime. It soon came to light that Antonio had previously rented a room in Daniele DeSantis' apartment, but had moved out a few months earlier. He had not been considered a person of interest because he no longer lived there. Antonio was described as quiet and unremarkable, someone who avoided conflict and focused solely on his studies. Many people in the building didn't even remember that Daniele had once rented out a room. Those who knew Antonio spoke of him positively. He was diligent, polite, and attentive. He rarely interacted with anyone, didn't attend social gatherings or parties, and had no known romantic relationships. To most, he seemed like a typical bookworm. Law enforcement quickly obtained handwriting samples from Antonio's university records to compare with the writing on the note found at the crime scene. The forensic analysis confirmed a perfect match, leaving little doubt that the police had identified the person behind the heinous act. No one knew exactly where Antonio had moved after leaving Danielle's apartment, but detectives managed to track down his mother, who provided his current address. It turned out he was renting a room in a shared house with 2 other students, just 3 blocks away from the crime scene. The lease was under another student's name, and the rent was split between the 3 of them. On September 28, 2020, a week after the tragic events, Antonio DeMarco was arrested outside a comic book store where he had been buying a magazine. When approached by officers, he showed no surprise, made no attempt to resist, and didn't try to escape. Instead, he gave a crooked smirk and asked how long it had taken them to find him. From the outset, Antonio didn't deny his involvement. He displayed no emotions, no remorse, and answered investigators' questions in cold, detached detail, even appearing to take satisfaction in recounting the events of that night. He recalled seeing the young eyewitness walking his dog, and admitted he had considered silencing him, but was in too much of a rush. He also noted that other people nearby would have complicated the situation. Antonio's chillingly calm demeanor and lack of regret were in stark contrast to his angelic appearance and the glowing remarks from his university and the hospital where he was training as a medical intern. Despite being considered shy, Antonio was described as a promising and dedicated young doctor. Detectives decided to dig deeper into Antonio's past and turn to his mother for answers. She had raised him alone, and Antonio was her only child, deeply cherished and adored. She was devastated by the accusations against him. During questioning, she admitted that her son had always been different. As a child, he struggled to connect with others, avoided forming friendships, and preferred solitude. In his teenage years, Antonio became increasingly withdrawn. He would spend hours in his room drawing or working on projects and reacted aggressively if interrupted. Concerned, his mother took him to a specialist. Antonio was eventually diagnosed with multiple mental health disorders and socialization issues. Despite these challenges, he excelled academically, particularly in subjects like math and science, which helped him secure a spot at medical school. Antonio experienced panic attacks and gradually retreated into a fictional world of comic books, further distancing himself from reality. A psychiatrist prescribed medication to help manage his condition, but according to his mother, Antonio didn't adhere to the prescribed dosage. He would often skip his medication for weeks and then take a dangerously high dose all at once. Antonio's psychiatrist had recommended he keep a personal journal as an outlet for his thoughts, emotions, and feelings, given his difficulty expressing them. Antonio's mother later turned this journal over to investigators. At first, the entries seemed relatively innocuous. Antonio wrote about his longing to live a normal life, making friends, dating, and fitting in. However, he struggled to connect with others and felt unsure of how to navigate social interactions. During his time at the university, Antonio lived with his mother until he came across an advertisement for a room for rent at a reasonable price. The home, where Daniele lived, was conveniently close to the university, so Antonio quickly responded to the listing. He proved to be a quiet and responsible tenant, paying his rent on time and causing no trouble. Based on his journal entries, Antonio seemed to view Daniele as a potential friend during that period. However, the dynamic shifted with Eleonora's arrival. The couple spent increasing amounts of time together, with Eleonora often staying overnight. When they decided to live together permanently, Daniele politely asked Antonio to move out. Antonio took the request as a deep personal insult, but he didn't show it outwardly. Instead, he claimed he had already been planning to find a new place closer to the hospital where he was interning. Daniele allowed him ample time to move out, but the longer Antonio stayed, the more his resentment toward the couple grew. Antonio's journal began to take a darker turn. He started writing in disturbing detail about different ways he could harm the couple, even describing acts of torment. In court, He later claimed these writings were simply a way to vent his anger and prevent himself from acting on it. However, his fantasies only intensified, evolving into a carefully thought-out plan. After Antonio moved out, his journal entries became increasingly methodical. He outlined step-by-step instructions for what he intended to do to Daniele and Eleonora. To carry out his plan, Antonio had secretly made an extra copy of the apartment key before moving out, which he never returned. His writings revealed an intense hatred for the couple, with a desire to see them suffer a prolonged and painful demise, though there appeared to be no specific reason for his animosity. Antonio prepared meticulously and left little evidence behind. Investigators noted the absence of the perpetrator's fingerprints at the scene. According to Antonio's journal, he had taken extra precautions. He coated his fingers with glue and wore gloves over them for added security. On the night of the attack, Antonio dressed in plain, unremarkable clothing and used a nylon stocking as a makeshift mask. He carried a backpack containing a change of clothes, bleach for cleaning up evidence, and zip ties intended to restrain his victims for torture. The level of planning and premeditation displayed by Antonio painted a chilling picture of someone who had been consumed by his own dark thoughts, transforming his fantasies into a horrifying reality. The student meticulously planned several escape routes to avoid being caught on surveillance cameras. Upon arriving at the apartment building, he spent some time sitting outside under the windows, listening carefully to make sure no one else was inside with the couple. Once he was certain they were alone, he entered the building, climbed to the second floor, and paused outside their door for a few more minutes, listening for any sounds. Satisfied, he used the spare key he had kept after moving out and quietly opened the door. Antonio caught Daniele and Eleonora off guard as they were having dinner. Daniele, surprised by the intrusion, asked who he was, what he wanted, and how he had gotten inside. Antonio didn't respond. When Daniele stood up abruptly to confront him and force him out, Antonio stabbed him multiple times in the chest and abdomen. Eleonora began screaming and, in an attempt to protect her fiancé, charged at Antonio. He retaliated by stabbing her in the shoulder. Despite his injuries, Daniele managed to get to his feet and pull the nylon stocking mask off Antonio's face, recognizing him. It is believed that Eleonora then started shouting Antonio's name, pleading for him to stop, though witnesses later misheard her cries. The struggle escalated. Antonio, determined to silence Eleonora, threw her to the floor and continued to attack her. Meanwhile, Daniele, bleeding heavily, managed to stagger to the front door, open it, and step into the hallway, trying to call for help. Antonio followed him and delivered a series of fatal blows, leaving Daniele with no chance of survival. Afterward, Antonio returned to Eleonora, who had crawled into the hallway. He stabbed her repeatedly in the back, neck, and head until she stopped moving. Antonio then took out the bleach he had brought in his backpack, but realizing he didn't have enough time to clean the scene, abandoned the effort. He knew the neighbors had likely heard the commotion and already called the police. In a rush, he changed into clean clothes, left the zip ties behind, and fled the scene. The paper containing his plan must have fallen out of his backpack in the hallway during the chaos. DNA samples collected from Antonio matched those found on the nylon stocking he had used as a mask, providing crucial evidence against him. However, Antonio didn't even attempt to deny his guilt. He openly described his actions in detail and expressed regret, only that the noise and panic had prevented him from carrying out the torture he had planned. Antonio's defense attorney immediately argued that he was mentally unfit to stand trial and requested a psychiatric evaluation. However, the evaluation concluded that Antonio was fully aware of his actions at the time of the crime. The investigation also revealed that the crime had been premeditated and Antonio showed no remorse for what he had done. When Antonio was asked why he had developed such hatred toward Daniele and Eleonora that he wanted them dead, he responded calmly, "They were too happy, and it made me furious." He also admitted that he had intended to torment his victims, but things hadn't gone according to his plan. During the trial, the prosecution brought up the peculiar drawing of a sad face found on the nylon stocking Antonio had used as a mask. They questioned him about its origin and significance. Antonio explained that he had intended to leave the same symbol on the apartment wall, drawing it in the victim's blood as a kind of signature. He even admitted that he had considered using this symbol in future crimes, openly stating that he would have committed another crime because he had enjoyed taking lives. On June 7, 2021, Antonio DeMarco was found guilty of premeditated double homicide committed with exceptional cruelty. The court also deemed him a significant threat, stating that he was capable of committing such crimes again. He showed no remorse, and psychiatric evaluations suggested he had the potential to become a serial killer. Antonio was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Case 6. Early on the morning of January 1st, 2012, on a quiet street in the Grapevine Hollow neighborhood, the festive atmosphere turned to panic and horror. Ashley Fawless, a young mother, was being rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, her life hanging by a thread after suffering a gunshot wound to the head. Her parents, who had briefly left the house, were in a state of shock as they returned to find the home surrounded by police and paramedics. Just hours earlier, the house had been filled with joy and celebration. What had happened on this New Year's night? Only one person could have the answer, her husband, Tom, who was in the room at the time of the tragedy. But his version of events was raising more questions than it answered. Ashley's family was convinced they knew the truth, yet investigators faced numerous contradictions and strange details. The mystery behind the doors of that house went far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Early that morning, on January 1st, 2012, 28-year-old Ashley Fawless was taken to the hospital with a gunshot wound to her head. Ashley's family immediately believed they knew what had happened. To them, it was obvious that only one person could have been involved, her husband, Tom. He had been in the room with Ashley when the gunshot was fired. Known for his quick temper and controlling nature, Tom was the primary focus of suspicion for Ashley's family. However, for the police, the story was not so clear-cut. Contradictory evidence was found at the scene, requiring a thorough investigation. Witness statements kept changing, and Ashley's past proved to be just as complex as her present. Years would pass before new details emerged, casting a different light on the events of that night. The festive evening that began on December 31st, 2011, was supposed to be calm and family-focused. Tom and Ashley Fawless hosted a New Year's party at their home on Zinfandel Street. Guests danced, drank, and celebrated. Tom and Ashley seemed like a happy couple. Just an hour earlier, they had been dancing together, looking lovingly at one another, much to the delight of their guests. But everything changed as midnight approached, when Ashley announced she was going outside with her relatives, which angered Tom. The argument erupted suddenly in front of Ashley's family, who were the last guests remaining at the house. Tom began yelling at Ashley and her relatives, who tried to defend her. When their attempts to mediate failed, the relatives decided to leave, following Tom's demand. Slamming the door, Tom retreated to the bedroom. Ashley's parents also decided to leave, leaving the couple alone. A few hours later, tragedy struck. Tom was frustrated by Ashley's family's involvement in their personal lives. He felt Ashley shouldn't have gone outside with her parents, especially after they had been drinking throughout the evening. He demanded that Ashley's parents leave. After they were gone, the tension between the couple only grew stronger. Once the guests had left, Tom and Ashley were alone, and the argument reignited in the bedroom. Tom claimed that their fight was rooted in long-standing issues. Ashley, however, insisted she would live her life the way she wanted, regardless of his opinions. Tom accused her of being influenced by her family. Standing by the closet as he changed into pajamas, Tom said he heard Ashley handling the gun kept under the mattress. Tom tried to ask her what she was doing, but before he could finish, the shot rang out. Emergency services arrived at the scene in the early morning hours of January 1st, 2012. The police called in investigators from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, following allegations from Ashley's family. Her parents, Jenna Fox and Joe Redan, immediately accused Tom of being responsible for what had happened, citing his anger and aggression earlier that evening. At first glance, the evidence at the scene suggested Ashley had taken her own life. However, investigators noticed details that raised doubts. Crooked picture frames on the walls and items scattered across the floor hinted at a possible struggle before the gunshot. Divorce papers left and signed on a dresser seemed to confirm reports of tension in the marriage. Ashley and Tom had met in the spring of 2007 through an online dating site. Ashley was outgoing and full of energy, and Tom quickly fell for her. Ashley was already a mother to 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and their relationship moved quickly. A year after they met, the couple had a son, and just 2 weeks after his birth, they got married. In 2010, Tom adopted Ashley's daughters, and the family began living together. However, by the end of 2011, tension within the family was growing. Ashley's older daughters were 9 and 6 years old, and their youngest son had just celebrated his 3rd birthday. The boy had been diagnosed with hydrocephalus, which required several surgeries. The stress of his condition took a heavy toll on Ashley, who was struggling to balance her responsibilities as a mother with the difficulties in her marriage to Tom. These challenges created a tense atmosphere, setting the stage for the tragic events of that New Year's Eve. In 2010, Ashley Fallis was terminated from her position at the North Colorado Medical Center. The official reason given was insubordination, with reports citing aggressive behavior. Although she filed a lawsuit for wrongful termination and won a settlement, the legal victory did little to resolve her other challenges. The following year, she began a brief affair with a high school sweetheart, which further strained her already fragile marriage to Tom. During the same period, Ashley sought help from a psychiatrist. She was prescribed medication to reduce anxiety and stabilize her mood, as she had been experiencing up to 4 or 5 panic attacks per week. These struggles placed a significant strain on her relationship with Tom. While Tom was aware of her affair, he chose not to pursue a divorce. The divorce papers later found by investigators in their bedroom were drafted by Ashley herself back in 2009, during a time when the couple had considered separating due to conflicting work schedules. However, they ultimately decided to stay together and work on their relationship. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Tom claimed that their relationship had started to improve. He had secured steady employment with the Weld County Sheriff's Office, working as a corrections officer. Meanwhile, Ashley found her own way of coping with life's difficulties. She began speaking at conferences, sharing her experiences raising a child with hydrocephalus, and offering support to other parents in similar situations. A few weeks before New Year's Eve, Ashley took a home pregnancy test that came back positive. This was a shock, as she had undergone a sterilization procedure after the birth of their youngest child to prevent future pregnancies. Despite the odds, Ashley believed she might be pregnant. To protect the potential baby, she stopped taking her anxiety and mood-stabilizing medication. However, on the day of the party, December 31st, 2011, just hours before guests arrived, Ashley began her menstrual cycle. A second pregnancy test showed a negative result, which dealt an emotional blow to both her and Tom. That day had begun with a discussion about whether it might still be possible to reverse the sterilization procedure and try to have another child. Ashley's mother had originally suggested the procedure years earlier, but now the decisions were entirely theirs. Both Ashley and Tom expressed a desire to have another baby, and the sudden turn of events created significant emotional tension. All of this formed the backdrop to the events of that evening. The party at Ashley and Tom Fallis' home was lively. Despite the emotionally draining day, Ashley made every effort to appear cheerful. She drank, danced, and embraced her loved ones. According to her parents, Joe and Jenna, Ashley seemed happy and strong, just as she always did. They found it hard to believe that she would have willingly left her family behind. But Tom claimed that behind Ashley's outward calm lay deep emotional struggles her family wasn't aware of. Investigators paid close attention to Tom's version of the events that night. His interview began with a recounting of the day, how the negative pregnancy test result had set the tone, and how a small disagreement escalated when Ashley decided to go outside with her relatives. The argument spiraled into a discussion about Ashley's tendency to take her mother's advice too often. Tom said he didn't want to continue arguing and just wanted things to settle down. During Tom's police interview, investigators noticed scratches on his neck and chest. These marks raised suspicions as they could have been evidence of a struggle. Tom explained that he had recently shaved his chest for the first time and scratched his skin due to itching, which caused the red marks. As for the scratches on his neck, he said they could have been caused by stress. The questioning grew more intense as the interview continued. Tom felt that he was being accused of a crime and insisted on his innocence. He maintained that he did not shoot Ashley and that he wasn't in the room when the gun went off. Meanwhile, investigators were questioning neighbors and examining the home. A neighbor, Chelsea Origo, reported hearing Ashley shout, "Get off me," moments before the gunshot. This account contradicted Tom's claims. When investigators asked Tom about the shouting, he denied it and said he never forced Ashley to do anything against her will. He explained that he simply asked her to stop taking advice from her mother as it was causing tension in their marriage. Investigators pressed him further, pointing out that the wound on the back of Ashley's head made it unlikely she could have shot herself. Tom demanded tests for gunpowder residue on his hands to prove his innocence. He also insisted that Ashley's hands be tested to determine whether she could have fired the gun. Despite his explanations, investigators remained skeptical due to the strange circumstances and conflicting evidence. While Tom was at the station, Ashley Fawless was in the hospital where doctors fought to save her life. Tragically, a few hours after her admission, they announced that she had passed away. When Tom learned of her death, he was devastated. He claimed that when he held her in his arms after the incident, he saw her breathing and believed she had a chance to survive. After 3 hours of questioning, investigators had not obtained a confession from Tom, but they also could not rule him out as a suspect. Tom became increasingly agitated, maintaining his innocence and repeatedly stating that he could never harm his wife. For days after the incident, Ashley's death was officially ruled as a voluntary act. Although lab tests were not yet completed, the medical examiner concluded that her death was self-inflicted. The case was closed, leaving Ashley's family in shock and disbelief. They felt that the investigation had been rushed and that Tom had received preferential treatment because of his job in the county's corrections system, which they believed influenced the investigation's outcome. However, Tom's role in a separate law enforcement agency unrelated to the investigation made it difficult to prove he had any connections to the detectives working on the case. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation was brought in almost immediately to ensure objectivity. Still, mistakes were made. Tom was not separated from potential witnesses at the scene, a violation of standard protocol. Additionally, his hands were not covered to preserve potential gunpowder residue, which could have served as crucial evidence. Ashley's family criticized the way Tom's interrogation was handled, arguing that 3 hours was insufficient for the primary person of interest in a case involving a suspicious death. They believed investigators did not seriously consider Tom a suspect until Ashley's parents, Jenna and Joe, insisted on it. Only after their persistent demands did detectives adjust their approach. But even then, the investigation remained superficial. Ultimately, Tom was allowed to leave. After the tragedy, Tom took the children and moved to another state, Indiana, to be closer to his sister. He enrolled in college to pursue a bachelor's degree and appeared to be trying to start fresh. Meanwhile, Ashley's parents, Jenna and Joe, refused to back down. They reached out to the media, calling for justice. In interviews, they described Tom's short temper and emphasized that Ashley loved life and would never have willingly ended it. It was reporter Justin Joseph who uncovered a significant new witness, 17-year-old Nick Glover, a neighbor of the Fawless family. Nick revealed that on January 1, 2012, he was home with friends when he saw emergency vehicles arrive at the Fawless residence. He also claimed to have heard Tom tell Ashley's parents, "I shot my wife." Furthermore, Nick said he shared this information with Detective Michael Yates during an interview, but there was no record of his statement in the police reports. The absence of documentation raised new allegations against law enforcement, suggesting possible corruption and a cover-up. It was suspected that Detective Yates had intentionally ignored this critical testimony to protect Tom. In April 2014, more than 2 years after Ashley's death, the Evans Police Department reopened the case. Fresh allegations included claims that Yates had omitted key evidence and altered a witness's testimony to support the narrative that Ashley had taken her own life. Law enforcement officials denied any favoritism, stating that the investigation had conducted fairly. On November 18, 2014, Tom Fawless was arrested near his home in Indiana. Despite being charged with second-degree manslaughter, he continued to maintain his innocence. The case, which had gained significant public attention largely due to Justin Joseph's investigation, left many questions unanswered. For example, bruises on Ashley's legs sparked speculation about a flashlight found at the scene, which some believed might have been used during an altercation. However, it was later revealed that the flashlight belonged to an officer who had attempted to provide first aid and was unrelated to the crime. The prosecution argued that during a confrontation, Tom seized the Taurus 9mm handgun that Ashley kept under the mattress, pressed it to her head, and fired. He then lowered her body to the floor and called emergency services. At the trial, Ashley's mother, Jenna Fox, testified that Tom had acted aggressively at the New Year's Eve party, using harsh language that led to a conflict. Tom denied these allegations. Later, during the trial, Jenna mentioned that there was a history of mental health issues in the family. Ashley's grandmother and uncle had taken their own lives. The prosecution used this as evidence to support their theory that Ashley may have willingly ended her life. However, Ashley's psychiatrist testified that as of December 2011, she showed no signs of depression. The defense later presented information that Ashley had been seeing 2 psychiatrists and a therapist simultaneously, which resulted in her receiving overlapping prescriptions. Forensic expert testimonies about the crime scene were contradictory. Dan Gilliam, who had spent hundreds of hours analyzing evidence, argued that Tom could not have shot his wife. According to Gilliam, individuals who fire weapons in a fit of rage rarely stop after a single shot. Despite his conclusions, Gilliam was called as a witness by the prosecution. Another expert, Jonathan Priest, reviewed the case materials and visited the crime scene. He concluded that Tom had been very close to Ashley when the shot was fired. Priest reasoned that if Tom had been farther away, there would have been more blood spread throughout the room. His analysis was based on the timeline of when Tom reached Ashley and began providing assistance, as documented by the first responders. The prosecution used this argument to challenge the defense's claims. The prosecution alleged that Ashley's emotional struggles were exacerbated by her unsuccessful attempts to conceive. An autopsy revealed that after a 2-ball ligation, she could have potentially become pregnant, but at the time of her death, she was not pregnant. However, Ashley reportedly believed she had been pregnant 3 times in the 9 months leading up to her death, which added to her emotional distress. Psychiatrists at the trial highlighted how these circumstances might have significantly impacted her mental state. In April 2014, 2 years after Ashley's death, the Evans Police Department reopened the investigation. New allegations surfaced against Detective Michael Yates, who was accused of excluding critical evidence and altering witness testimonies. Law enforcement officials continued to insist that the investigation had been conducted fairly and impartially, dismissing claims of bias. Nick Glover testified that on the night of Ashley Fawless' death, he overheard Tom tell his parents, "I shot my wife." This statement became a pivotal part of the prosecution's case, especially after Nick's friend Chelsea Origo gave her own account. Nick's mother, Kathy, claimed that Chelsea had also heard Ashley shouting, "Get off me." However, during the trial, Chelsea stated that she could not recall the argument clearly because she'd consumed too much alcohol that night. Nick, on the other hand, insisted that he clearly remembered the events of that night, emphasizing that such a confession was unforgettable. His claims drew the attention of investigators, and Detective Michael Yates, who had interviewed Nick on the day of Ashley's death, came under internal review for failing to document this alleged confession. However, the investigation found no misconduct on Yates' part, and he maintained that Nick had never made such a statement to him. During Nick Glover's cross-examination, defense attorneys highlighted several inconsistencies in his testimony. They pointed out that after Tom's alleged confession, Nick continued to maintain a friendly relationship with him, participating in family activities, including camping trips and Christmas celebrations. When questioned about why he acted this way, Nick responded over 90 times with, "I don't remember." Later, former Weld County Sheriff's Deputy Chris Graves also came forward, claiming he had heard Tom confess. According to Graves, he arrived at the scene and heard Tom shouting, "I can't believe I shot her. I can't believe she's dead." However, the defense pointed out inconsistencies in Graves' account. The crime scene was crowded with personnel from multiple agencies, family members, and neighbors, yet no one else reported hearing Tom's alleged outburst. Graves also did not detain Tom at the scene, explaining that it was outside his jurisdiction. Additionally, the defense noted that Chris Graves had not filed any reports about his statements for 3 years following the incident. He was later dismissed from the sheriff's office for dishonesty, further undermining his credibility. These factors cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. Many physical pieces of evidence also failed to support the prosecution's theory. Gunshot residue tests conducted on Tom's hands showed no traces, while residue was found on both of Ashley's hands. Scratches on Tom's chest, which might have indicated a struggle, contained no traces of Ashley's DNA. Likewise, nail scrapings from Ashley revealed no DNA from Tom. These findings raised serious doubts about the claim that there had been a physical altercation between the couple before the shot was fired. Tom Fawless chose not to testify in his own defense. The trial lasted several weeks, during which more than 40 witnesses were called to testify. The defense's closing arguments focused on Ashley's mental health and the significant challenges she had faced in the months leading up to her death. Repeated pregnancy tests, her son's illness, prescription medications, job loss, and an affair. According to the defense, these factors could have contributed to the tragedy. A surprising development during the trial was the introduction of Ashley's alleged farewell letters. In these letters, she apologized to Tom, referred to herself as a failure, and wrote that she could no longer continue living. Ashley's family expressed doubts about the authenticity of these letters, as they had only learned of their existence years after her death. Her relatives claimed they had never seen any signs that Ashley might have written such letters and believed they were fabricated. After 3.5 hours of deliberation, including a 1-hour lunch break, the jury reached its verdict. Tom Follis was found not guilty of second-degree manslaughter and all related charges. The decision was a devastating blow to Ashley's family. Her parents, Jenna Fox and Joe Ragwin, firmly believed in Tom's guilt and filed lawsuits against the Evans Police Department, claiming that investigators had concealed or falsified evidence. They argued that Nick Glover's 2012 testimony had been ignored, and that other officers who might have overheard Tom's alleged confession remained silent. Ultimately, their lawsuits were dismissed. Despite the acquittal, Ashley's family refused to accept the outcome and remained convinced of Tom's culpability. However, they managed to maintain a relationship with the children, securing visitation rights that allowed them to stay involved in their lives. Meanwhile, Tom Follis continues to face financial challenges due to legal expenses and is working to rebuild his life while pursuing his education. Following the tragedy, the children remained in Tom's care. He moved them to another state to start over and be closer to his sister. He explained to them that their mother had passed away in an accident, but plans to share more details with them when they are older. Despite all efforts to uncover the truth, the case remains shrouded in uncertainty. Questions linger, and each answer seems to generate more doubt. The story of Ashley Follis is one of those cases where the line between truth and deception becomes blurred, leaving behind only shadows of suspicion and unresolved mysteries. Case 7. Ocean Springs, a quaint coastal town in Mississippi, was known for its tranquility and laid-back lifestyle. It was the kind of place where life moved at a slower pace and neighbors looked out for one another. Among its residents was Lauren Johansson, a compassionate young woman who seemed to make the world a better place just by being in it. Lauren had a deep love for animals, dedicating much of her time to helping local shelters. She dreamed of one day opening a sanctuary where every stray could find a safe haven. But on the morning of July 3rd, 2024, everything changed. Lauren didn't come home, and her phone was unreachable. A strange message sent from her number raised alarm bells for her father. What followed was a deeply unsettling chain of events, revealing the cracks in the system meant to protect and serve. Lauren Johansson was born on October 30th, 2001, in Ocean Springs. The town, with its picturesque scenery, oak-lined streets, and expansive beaches, attracted countless visitors. For Lauren, however, Ocean Springs wasn't just a tourist destination. It was home. It was a place where she experienced the love and support of her family, which shaped her into the kind and responsible person she became. Her parents, Robert and Tamala, raised Lauren with great warmth. She had 2 older sisters, both of whom faced significant health challenges from birth. From a young age, Lauren took an active role in helping care for them, assisting her parents with daily tasks. This experience instilled in her a strong sense of responsibility and compassion. Even as a child, she had an uncanny ability to care for others and always sought to ease the burdens of those around her. Lauren's love for animals emerged early in life. She was captivated by all forms of wildlife, from pets to creatures in the wild. Her parents nurtured this passion, and over the years, it grew into a calling. By the time she was a teenager, Lauren was volunteering at local animal shelters. She didn't just feed and clean up after dogs and cats. She cared for injured animals, including horses, birds, and even wild creatures that had been rescued. Her kindness, dedication, and drive made it clear that Lauren was destined to help others. In high school, she decided to pursue a career in nursing, a choice that aligned perfectly with her nurturing nature. After graduating, she enrolled in the nursing program at the University of Southern Mississippi. Lauren excelled in her studies, fueled by a deep interest in the field and a tireless work ethic. Her outstanding grades reflected her determination to succeed and her genuine commitment to making a difference in people's lives. Lauren's dreams extended far beyond a career in nursing. Since childhood, she had envisioned creating a sanctuary for the rescue and rehabilitation of animals. Every dollar she earned was carefully set aside for this goal. Her mission was clear: to build a place where animals in need could find safety and a chance at a new life. This project became her purpose and her source of inspiration. Lauren met Bryson Rivers during her senior year of high school. Bryson was charismatic, athletically gifted, and widely regarded as the perfect guy. Their paths crossed at a school event where both had volunteered. What started as casual conversations soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Bryson, a year older than Lauren, left a lasting impression on her. Born on February 9, 2000, he grew up in a large family, steeped in strict religious traditions. His parents placed a strong emphasis on family values, church attendance, and fostering close relationships. As the eldest sibling, Bryson was expected to help care for his younger brothers and sisters. This upbringing instilled in him a sense of responsibility and discipline that contributed to his seemingly flawless image. In high school, Bryson excelled both academically and athletically. He consistently earned high marks, garnering praise from teachers for his diligence and focus. His athletic prowess, particularly in track and field and football, made him a standout on the school's team and a favorite among his peers. Teachers saw great potential in him, while friends admired his determination and ability to achieve his goals. From the outside, his relationship with Lauren seemed picture perfect. Both were ambitious, driven, and appeared to complement each other well. Lauren often shared how thoughtful and caring Bryson was, delighting in how supportive he seemed. Bryson, in turn, spoke highly of Lauren, accompanying her to important events and making her feel valued. But over time, troubling patterns began to emerge. Early in their relationship, Bryson displayed a need for control. Initially, it came across as endearing, requests to spend more time together or to hear about Lauren's day. However, these requests soon escalated into demands. Bryson grew increasingly jealous of the men in Lauren's life, including her friends and classmates. He began insisting that she limit her interactions with anyone he didn't personally approve of, claiming it was for her own good. Lauren's friends noticed subtle but significant changes in her behavior. She started attending fewer social gatherings, often avoiding discussions about her relationship. She excused Bryson's increasingly controlling tendencies, attributing them to the stress he was under from school and preparing for military service. Even when Bryson's behavior turned harsh, Lauren defended him, emphasizing how much he cared about her. As Bryson's jealousy grew, so did his attempts to manipulate Lauren. He often played on her emotions, using guilt to convince her that his actions were justified. Any attempt by Lauren to establish boundaries led to arguments, which Bryson would follow with reassurances that everything he did was for the good of their relationship. Over time, this behavior became normalized, and Lauren found herself increasingly adapting to his expectations. Over the years, Bryson's influence became more pronounced. He skillfully alternated between showing care and exerting emotional pressure, creating a dynamic that made Lauren feel dependent on him. This pattern caused her to overlook the warning signs of an unhealthy relationship. Concerned friends and family tried to warn her, but Lauren repeatedly excused his behavior, insisting that he was a good person going through a rough patch. The situation escalated when Bryson first displayed physical aggression. During an argument, his voice grew louder as he accused Lauren of not appreciating him enough. He then grabbed her wrist to stop her from leaving the room. This was the first instance where his behavior crossed a clear line. Although shaken, Lauren later explained the incident to her friends, rationalizing it by saying that Bryson had been upset and didn't mean to hurt her. Lauren's friends became increasingly worried as they noticed her subdued demeanor. She withdrew from conversations about her relationship, whereas she had previously been open about sharing happy moments. Her loved ones expressed their concern, especially after she mentioned that Bryson often criticized her behavior, claiming it was the cause of their conflicts. Her closest friends tried to convince her that his treatment of her was unacceptable, but Lauren dismissed their concerns, calling it a temporary difficulty. Another red flag emerged in Bryson's public behavior. He often interrupted Lauren during conversations or made sharp remarks if he thought she was drawing too much attention. One incident occurred during a night out with friends when Lauren thanked a waiter for their service. This small gesture irritated Bryson, and he spent the rest of the evening making his displeasure known, emphasizing it through passive-aggressive comments directed at her. Lauren's father, Robert, also began noticing changes. Although he never witnessed overt aggression from Bryson, his instincts told him that something wasn't right. He tried speaking to Lauren several times, but she refused to acknowledge any problems, insisting that her father was being overly protective and unfairly critical of Bryson. The situation reached its peak when Lauren completely stopped sharing her feelings with those around her. Anytime her friends or family brought up her relationship, she would either abruptly change the subject or defend Bryson, explaining away his behavior as a result of stress, exhaustion, or work-related frustrations. In her mind, she began to believe it was her responsibility to avoid triggering his outbursts. These patterns of aggression and manipulation created a closed cycle for Lauren. She became increasingly isolated from those who might have been able to help her, and gradually succumbed to Bryson's influence. Her internal struggle was apparent to her loved ones, but they couldn't sway her decisions. Lauren believed she could handle the situation on her own, not realizing she had already fallen into emotional and psychological dependence on her partner. In December 2023, Lauren and Bryson planned a trip to Nashville. Bryson was on leave from the military, and Lauren was on winter break from college. For Lauren, the trip was an opportunity to take a break from her daily routine, while for Bryson, it was a chance to present himself as a caring and attentive partner. They planned to spend a few days enjoying the city's atmosphere, visiting popular attractions, and relaxing together. The trip started without incident. During the first few days, they walked through the streets, explored local landmarks, and visited well-reviewed restaurants. Bryson appeared calm and seemed to enjoy their time together. However, beneath the surface, tension between them lingered. Lauren felt the weight of his expectations, but continued to dismiss the warning signs. On December 11th, the couple decided to visit a local bar to watch a game that was important to Bryson. As a former athlete, Bryson remained an avid fan of his favorite team, and not even a vacation could make him miss the game. At first, the evening was uneventful. They sat at a table, ordered drinks, and watched the game. Lauren appeared relaxed, though there was a hint of weariness in her eyes. The situation escalated unexpectedly when Lauren went to use the restroom. She asked a waiter for directions and followed his guidance. A few minutes later, the same waiter happened to walk down the same corridor, an innocent coincidence that sparked Bryson's unwarranted suspicion. When Lauren returned to the table, she noticed Bryson's demeanor had changed. He looked tense and irritated. Without any basis, he accused her of deliberately seeking the waiter's attention, and even hinted at non-existent infidelity. The argument escalated quickly. Bryson raised his voice, expressing his displeasure and ignoring Lauren's attempts to calm him down. Witnesses later recalled that Lauren appeared to be trying to de-escalate the situation, but Bryson continued to press his accusations. Eventually, the couple left the bar and headed toward their car, which was parked nearby. When they got into the car, the tension between Lauren and Bryson reached a breaking point. Bryson locked the doors, preventing Lauren from escaping, and took her phone, cutting off any chance for her to call for help. He began yelling at her, his anger escalating rapidly into physical aggression. Bryson started striking her, ignoring her cries and desperate attempts to defend herself. Lauren banged on the windows and honked the horn in an attempt to draw attention, but unfortunately, there was no one around to hear or help. After several minutes of abuse, Bryson started the car and began driving down deserted streets, ignoring Lauren's pleas to let her go. He made chilling threats, saying he'd leave her body in the woods where no one would ever find it. Eventually, he pulled into an empty parking lot, where the assault continued. In a desperate bid to protect herself, Lauren tried to reach into her bag for the handgun she carried for self-defense. However, Bryson noticed and grabbed the bag from her hands before she could retrieve it. The attack lasted nearly an hour, during which Lauren endured relentless cruelty. Bryson not only continued to hit her, but also made disturbing threats with an alarming sense of detachment. At one point, recordings from Lauren's phone captured him coldly, commenting about how her head was starting to resemble a bowling ball due to the swelling. Lauren's rescue came unexpectedly, thanks to a phone call Bryson made to his mother during the assault. Lauren screamed in the background, begging her to call the police. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Bryson's mother contacted law enforcement, even though she didn't know their exact location. Meanwhile, Lauren's father, Robert, used a family tracking app on their phones to pinpoint her location. When the police arrived, they heard Lauren's screams coming from inside the car. Officers immediately opened the door to find Bryson still restraining her. Lauren was battered and bloodied, her face and body bearing the unmistakable signs of severe trauma. She was barely able to speak. Bryson was arrested on the spot, and Lauren was rushed to the hospital. Her injuries left medical staff stunned. Multiple bruises, swelling, and other signs of extreme pain made it clear what she had endured. Despite everything, Lauren refused to press charges, explaining that she didn't want to ruin Bryson's life or his military career. While in custody, Bryson repeatedly tried to contact Lauren, exploiting unclear gaps in jail regulations. In his calls, he manipulated her, promising to change and swearing he would never hurt her again. Succumbing to his pressure, Lauren agreed to revise her initial statements, significantly affecting the case's trajectory. Following his arrest, Bryson Rivers was held in custody awaiting trial on charges of assault. Despite the gravity of the allegations and the substantial evidence against him, including audio recordings and Lauren's testimony, the court allowed him the possibility of bail. His bail was initially set at $250,000, temporarily keeping him detained while his case moved forward. 6 months later, Bryson and his legal team filed an appeal to reduce the bail amount. The judge granted the request, lowering the bail to $150,000. This decision surprised many, including Lauren's family, who believed that a reduced bail increased the risk of further aggression. Nevertheless, the amount was paid by Bryson's mother, and he was released pending trial. As part of the conditions of his release, Bryson was required to wear a GPS-enabled ankle monitor to track his movements. He was prohibited from leaving Nashville, approaching Lauren, or attempting to contact her in any way. However, due to bureaucratic errors, these conditions were not properly enforced. The officer who escorted Bryson to the monitoring center was not fully informed of the strict restrictions. Consequently, the GPS monitor was improperly configured, with no restrictions set to prevent him from leaving the city. This error occurred due to a lack of coordination between various departments. The documents detailing the terms of Bryson's release were not sent to the monitoring center in time. As a result, the staff responsible for setting up the ankle monitor relied on Bryson's own account, during which he provided false information and omitted the restrictions regarding Nashville and contact with Lauren. A few days after his release, the battery on Bryson's ankle monitor began to run low. He received a notification to charge the device but ignored it. Once the monitor fully lost power, authorities were unable to track his movements. The monitoring center became aware of the issue but failed to take immediate action. They did not alert law enforcement in a timely manner, allowing Bryson to freely violate the conditions of his release. Lauren's family only learned of the situation several days later. Her father, Robert, was informed by law enforcement that Bryson's monitor had stopped functioning and that his whereabouts were unknown. Shockingly, instead of taking immediate action, the police left a voicemail on Robert's phone, briefly explaining the situation. Realizing that authorities were not treating the situation with the urgency it required, Lauren's family took matters into their own hands. Robert contacted the local police department, demanding swift action to locate Bryson. He also insisted on inspecting the GPS system in Lauren's car to prevent a tragedy and to identify any potential leads on Bryson's location. Despite the family's persistent efforts, attempts to find Bryson remained ineffective. Days after the ankle monitor stopped working, his whereabouts were still unknown. Robert repeatedly pressed law enforcement to take more aggressive measures, pointing out the direct threat to his daughter's safety. The situation escalated on July 2nd when law enforcement received official confirmation that Bryson had violated the terms of his release. By then, his location was unknown and his phone had been turned off. Police issued a warrant for his arrest, but the decision came too late to prevent what followed. On the day Lauren went missing, her father, Robert, tried to contact her, but his calls went unanswered. Later, he received a text from her phone that immediately struck him as suspicious. The message didn't sound like something Lauren would write. Alarmed, Robert called his other daughter, who shared an apartment with Lauren, to check on her whereabouts. Lauren's sister woke up to find the apartment's front door open, the security cameras disabled, and Lauren's car missing from its usual spot. She quickly called Robert, who immediately contacted the police to report Lauren as missing. Despite the family's urgency and the evidence they provided, police were slow to act. It wasn't until more than 24 hours after Lauren was reported missing that law enforcement agreed to begin tracking her car. These delays became the culmination of a series of systemic failures in how authorities handled Bryson's case. Lauren's family had done everything they could to prevent a tragedy, but their efforts were undermined by a lack of decisive action from law enforcement. On July 3, 2024, police finally located Lauren's car using its GPS signal. The vehicle was parked in a remote area near the Wolf River Cemetery, just outside of town. The location was known for its isolation, surrounded by dense woods and far from any busy roads. The grim discovery immediately mobilized law enforcement officers and Lauren's father, Robert. As police approached the vehicle, a man suddenly bolted from it and ran into the woods. It was Bryson Rivers. Officers pursued him, but the thick vegetation made the chase difficult, and he quickly disappeared from sight. Robert, who had arrived at the scene right behind the police, rushed to the car, hoping to find his daughter. When he opened the door, he was met with a horrifying sight. On the back seat lay Lauren's body, wrapped in a sheet and black trash bags. Her face and head were so severely injured that she was almost unrecognizable. Robert, a medical professional accustomed to seeing injuries, later admitted that nothing in his career could have prepared him for what he saw that day. While some officers continued the search for Bryson, others began documenting the scene. Bloodstains inside the car and on the upholstery indicated that Lauren had endured a brutal beating before her death. Despite the physical and emotional toll, Robert stayed at the scene until the investigation concluded, refusing to leave even as his own condition began to deteriorate. The search for Bryson lasted several hours. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging technology were deployed and eventually located him deep in the woods. Officers surrounded the area, and 9 hours after the search began, Bryson was apprehended. At the time of his arrest, he did not resist and appeared calm and composed. Later, during his interrogation, Bryson Rivers provided his version of events. He claimed that on that morning, he arrived at Lauren's home knowing she planned to spend the day alone. For several days, she had not been answering his calls, which had fueled his anger and suspicions. Bryson couldn't accept that Lauren was trying to distance herself from him. After waiting for her to leave the house, he approached her outside, intending to talk. According to his account, Lauren refused to discuss anything with him and tried to walk away. At that point, Bryson grabbed her arm and forced her into her car. Lauren resisted, but he locked the doors and began driving. Bryson admitted to taking Lauren to her being overheard. However, the conversation quickly turned into an argument. Lauren demanded to be let go and threatened to contact the police, which only fueled Bryson's anger. He began yelling at her, accusing her of betrayal. When Lauren attempted to open the door to escape, Bryson shoved her back into the seat. This moment marked a turning point. He struck her, and the situation spiraled out of control. According to his statement, he claimed he was trying to calm her down, but ended up using physical force, unable to stop himself as he continued hitting her repeatedly. After the attack, Lauren was unconscious. Bryson said he initially tried to revive her, but realizing she was no longer alive, decided to dispose of her body. He wrapped her in a blanket from the trunk and placed her on the back seat of the car. Bryson then drove further into the countryside and stopped at an abandoned area near Wolf River Cemetery. He left the car there with Lauren's body inside, intending to return later to eliminate evidence. However, the police, tracking his movements, discovered the vehicle before he could carry out his plan. The news of Lauren's tragic death and Bryson's capture sparked widespread public outrage. Media coverage not only focused on the crime itself, but also highlighted the numerous failures within the justice system that allowed Bryson to evade proper monitoring after his release on bail. In the midst of their grief, Lauren's family issued a public statement, urging the community to address the systemic flaws that contributed to this devastating tragedy. Bryson's mother, who paid his bail, also faced sharp criticism. Many questioned whether she fully understood the potential consequences of her actions. Her decision drew widespread condemnation from the public, though Lauren's family never openly blamed her. At Lauren's funeral, friends, family, and countless residents of Ocean Springs gathered to mourn her loss. To everyone who knew her, Lauren remained a symbol of kindness, selflessness, and dedication to helping others. In her memory, her family decided to establish a foundation to support animal welfare projects, reflecting one of Lauren's greatest passions in life. Meanwhile, preparations were underway for Bryson's trial. Given that he was already under investigation for his earlier assault on Lauren, the court took a particularly serious stance. However, the very fact that he had been granted bail in the first place became a point of public outrage. Many called for reforms to bail laws to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Bryson Rivers stood trial in December 2024. He faced charges including kidnapping, first-degree murder, and attempted destruction of evidence. The trial is ongoing, and a final verdict has yet to be reached. Lauren's tragedy became more than just the story of one family. It sparked critical conversations about how the system addresses victims of domestic aggression and the importance of acting on early warning signs. Her story serves as a sobering reminder that ignoring the initial signs of danger can lead to irreversible consequences. One of the most pressing questions is why, despite audio recordings of the attack, witness testimonies, and physical evidence, Bryson was allowed to post bail after his initial arrest. This decision not only undermined public trust in the justice system, but also gave the perpetrator the opportunity to continue his actions. The lack of coordination between departments, failure to enforce bail conditions, and delayed response to the malfunction of Bryson's GPS monitor were all links in a chain of errors that ultimately led to Lauren's death. The monitoring system for accused individuals has also come under scrutiny. The misconfiguration of Bryson's GPS device, the ignored low battery alerts, and the failure to take immediate action when he disappeared highlighted the weaknesses in existing protocols. Had authorities responded promptly to the device's failure, this tragedy might have been prevented.